absolutely willing to, you know, look at regionalization resources if that's the best answer. I don't think any of us is fighting that by any means.
Yeah, so I guess, Harry, how do we work that? I know you can't force things or force these other areas to participate, but to me, we can save taxpayer money by doing one study. And I don't know, maybe our new application time frame will allow us more time to go out and solicit input from these neighboring agencies to see if they would be willing to do a regional thing. And I hope that's one of the things that results out of it. Because I think right now we're kind of squeezed for time. But how do we remedy that situation?
Well, so Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bettis, so there's two different aspects that we ought to look at in these master plans. And so one of those is the internal operation of this system. Okay, and as you see in terms of the write-up, they're interested in GIS, they're interested in hydraulic modeling of their existing system, leak detection, and they talk about storage. All of those are intrinsic to that system. When we talk about regionalization, that's really being driven, that takes in the water supply piece. If you look at our regional systems, I use the Shoshone Municipal Pipeline. Okay, so what was driving that regionalization was water quality, the drinking water quality. So as you go down the Shoshone River Valley, a number of those communities were on groundwater or surface water. They were having difficulty. Each one was having, you know, poor quality groundwater, additional surface water treatment plants. And so that's when the decision was made to go upstream, divert the water before it has a lot of the irrigation return flows there, take it into one treatment plant, and then distribute transmission water or the potable water through a transmission line. And so when you look at, you know, Powell, and we talked about the Northwest Rural, they're all tapped into a regional system that's providing good quality potable water. So it was the water quality issue that drove that particular project. You look at regional, there I think it was reliable supply. So again, it's the supply side that if it makes sense to build a long pipeline, that regionalization comes in and makes sense. But this master plan wants to focus on the internal components of the Bedford system. And I think as part of that evaluation, the supply side will be looked at. They have a spring that they use and one well. Is that adequate for their needs? And what we can look and quite frankly incorporate that incorporated in here is, okay, so do they have a supply problem? Do they have enough supply for the future? And when we start talking about additional supplies, that's then where, okay, is it more appropriate to then connect Star Valley Ranch or Thane into this system? So I think we will look at this. But it's not just come in and build a long pipeline through the entire valley, because that cost has to be balanced with if there is good quality water available locally. Would you develop one well for this community, or which might cost one 1/100th of what a large transmission pipeline would cost? So I mean, that's the balance, but it's water quality, it's water supply that drives the regional question.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is exactly true, but what happens if Turnerville comes in now, and after these guys are done and we decided that water supply, here's what we're going to do, and it would have been more feasible if we would have looked at Turnerville and or let's say I don't know how far are you from Thane's waterline border, mile and a half, something like that?
Border, or the central Bedford is about 5 miles from central thing.
Central tank, but I mean from their pipeline.
Border, it's pretty close, I think.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that even though you're looking at their supply, would it have been better to look at Turnerville, and I don't know how far Star Valley Ranch is north, maybe a couple miles, huh? So that you could have actually done exactly what you said. Maybe instead of investing money in what they're doing here, then from a financial standpoint, it makes it maybe more competitive to look at Thane. And I don't know how what basis do we use of all the work we did in Star Valley for the Star Valley area, where I think Mike Bessam said that was going to be some kind of a regional or master plan for the whole area. And I think they went all the way up into your area in Bedford and Thane, didn't they?
Yeah, there was 2009, there was a Star Valley Regional Master Plan. And I think that was backed by you guys. And I don't know exactly the results of that. I do know that, to incorporate a regional system would probably have to incorporate all of those low water supplies that we're talking about. And again, it's back to feasibility. Is that less or more? I guess would love to know how we should approach our, this from our standpoint. It seems like the process is to apply for a level 1 study.
I understand what you're saying. I think it's as much it is yours and maybe more, because we don't take the impetus to say, hey, let's work with you, or maybe instead of you coming in for an application, you make an inquiry and say, we're thinking about doing a level 1 study here. Let the office look at the area and say, hey, maybe we should go talk to Thane and Turnerville and whoever. And I know our application time's squeezed, and hopefully we remedy some of that. But I think from a taxpayer standpoint, the wiser we use our money, the better off we are. Mr. Chair.
I'm a little confused because when I look at this, it says summarizes the request on page 1 of the recommendation. It says the district is seeking a study containing master plan components and feasibility evaluations of storage, current additional supply, and potential regional supply solutions. So when I looked at this recommendation, I assumed that regional supply be looked at. I think it can build on the previous study, the 2009 study. So it seems to me the issue is already addressed here and is part of the recommendation.
Well, I guess in fact, then is it? I mean, from your standpoint, Harry.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it is that when we look at the water supply aspect, are their current supplies adequate? And in terms of the write-up, we're talking about their spring. And springs are always problematic because they are prone for contamination by surface water. So we'll look at the adequacy of that. And if the determination, well, we'll also look at not only their current service area, but are there future developments. Turner, you mentioned, is one. We'll look at all of that, and in that combination, the question has to be asked, are their water supplies adequate? And if the answer is no, then regionalization, I think, is one aspect that has to get looked at of, are there water supply systems that are close by that could provide water, additional water to the system?
I'm satisfied if that's what was going on, but I thought when I first looked at this, it was strictly for Bedford. And to me, I'm all for helping Bedford out. I know they got their relatively new tank, isn't it, up there? What is it? I can't remember the creeks. Strawberry. Yeah. So I guess what I'm concerned about is I don't want Turnerville to come in here for $100,000 and then Thane come in for another $100,000. And if we're going to solve a lot of this problem with this study, I'm happy with that.
Mr. Chair, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd like to add, I mean, I guess I understand the dilemma there, and I think it's something that needs to be explored. You know, I can't represent Turnerville or Star Valley Ranch or Thane, but I can say that Bedford's tried again very proactively to try to meet the needs of everybody in between those communities. We're constantly having people applying to be annexed into the district so that their water needs can be met. We've expanded our line and looped it around to Muddy String, which is closer to Thane, to meet the needs of those people that don't have access to the Thane's water. It's been a proactive approach, and that's the purpose for this study, would be to continue that proactive approach and to try to find those needs and open those discussions. We're not fighting that.
Good.
Well, Commissioner Budfeld, I heard you earlier, so go ahead.
I'm louder than you.
You're more important.
You just made me lose my whole train of thought. So Harry, can we request that in the RFP that you put out for this, that you have a specific separate line to consider regionalization and looking at these other areas?
Sure. Chairman, absolutely yes.
Usually that is a separate task, I think, in the scope of services, as I recall looking at all those. So. Commissioner Lancaster.
Commissioner Little and Marion and Mr. Chadwick. So these water systems are unique to the Salt River Range, and the frontage there has so much water coming out of them on the east side of Star Valley, and these guys are just downstream a bit. Every canyon has a stream plus 2 or 3 springs, and we over the years, our grandfathers captured this water and made these water systems. We talk about regionalization, I'm all for it, but Thane is way downstream from Bedford, and so they'd have to pump back up. Well, the alluvial fans that come out of each canyon make it so if you try to tie all this together, all these trunks together, you're going to have PRVs everywhere. And these pressure reducing valves are a pain and don't always work. So the people at the end of the line have more pressure than they can stand. The people up at the head, very little. Engineers work all that out. Turnerville's got a brand new system, nice system. I saw their sign just this week, was up there hunting. Star Valley Ranch has a new system. Bedford's system is 27 years old, and I think they are excellent operators. Their system is clean, their facilities are clean, but they're being proactive. And so regionalization is a big deal, yes. But at the same time, there's just enough water to run these 300 taps. And then in the next canyon, there's enough water to run 300 more taps, and it's all gravity feed. There are no pumps, and so we kind of have to look at the uniqueness of this Salt River Range frontage. And so it's a little bit unique, trying to keep the water clean and keep EPA happy. They don't like springs.
Any more questions for the sponsors? Okay, thank you very much.
So, Mr. Chairman, the next project, along with a number of projects following this, deal with watershed studies or some river basin planning issues. And so I'd like to ask Jody Pring to come up. She heads up our river basin planning, water planning section. And so let her talk to you about each of these planning projects. So, Jody, please.
Good afternoon. I hope you're all fortified after lunch. You ready? Okay, here we go. Yes, we've got some watershed studies and some recommendations, I should say, to talk to you about. So we first got the Big Sandy watershed study. So I think what I would like to do is we have a sponsor here from the district. So I'd like Mike to introduce himself. And
yeah, Michael Henn, District Manager for the Sublette County Conservation District.
And as most of you know, 2 weeks ago, Is that when we were all together last? We split the watershed study requirement from needing to be into the small water project program. But I want Mike to talk about what other things the watershed study offers to his district. He has been through this process before with New Fork. So I'd like to have him address some of that, and then he's happy to answer any questions any of you may have on this watershed study.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, like Jody said, we currently are just about ready to issue the draft on the New Fork Level 1. And my board and the landowners that the Conservation District represent have taken advantage of tweaking some of the outcomes of that Level 1. And a lot of it's been, you know, to get us ready for small waters projects, but it's also helped us work with confirming dry areas of the watershed. You know, some of the integral parts of the study that we've used in that fashion. Storage is always a big concern for Sublette County. We are the top of the watershed for most of the Colorado River Basin. And we also have done some unique GIS planning tools that I'd like to, or we're going to integrate into our county GIS map server. So it basically gives the landowners that we represent and the water users in the county the ability to find out their water rights. And they click on a point of diversion or click on the ditch, and it brings up everything e-permit gives you through the state engineer's office. So you'll have all your certificates, records, maps of ditches for everybody on that ditch. And we in the New Fork, we were able to get it down to, I think, 2 CFS, and we're going to work to try to get it narrowed down farther than that. But we use the watershed studies for a lot more than just entry into the small waters program. We also have streamlined when landowners bring projects to us, like in the New Fork, the conceptual design portion of the study, we've been able to maximize that. So basically, if the landowner comes back in when it's a draft or it's final and they're ready to move forward on a project that they've identified, I basically have the application already filled out. And that's a big deal when we're pursuing other grant funding, because we try to leverage small waters as far as we can. We'll go to NGOs and to other organizations to try to maximize leverage for the landowners to get good conservation water projects on the ground. And I'd be willing to answer any more questions you may have.
Questions? Commissioner Bud Fallon.
Looking at the map that Jody gave us of the Big Sandy Watershed Study, it looks to me like we've got, see, if you look at the left-hand side, I don't know, why did the map stop, or why does your study stop where it is? Are we leaving a donut hole somewhere? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bud Fallon, that's actually that huck, because I did the same thing when I pulled it up. It's actually and I'm going to butcher the name, but it's part of the Green River watershed. It's like the 18-mile Green River huck. It's a totally different watershed than the Big Sandy. We encompassed everything in the Big Sandy across 3 different conservation districts. We partnered with Sweetwater County Conservation District and coordinated with Paposia. They just have a small portion of this watershed, but that's actually part. I can't remember the name, to be honest, but it's a totally different watershed that encompasses the rest of that gray area or tan area. But I can't remember the name of it. Maybe Jody knows.
I don't know right off the top of my head.
So then, you take Big Sandy, so if you look over to the left and you see where the Green River is, where we don't have a watershed study, is that going to be 3 more watershed studies that we need to do?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bub Fallon, that, to my knowledge, I mean, it doesn't have a watershed study. There's not a lot of private land in there. Majority of that's going to be BLM and state lands. A lot of it's in that 18-mile desert country there. I don't know if there's a great desire or need. I haven't heard anything from my constituents and the landowners in Subic County, but
Chairman Little. So can you be more specific on, here we are looking at a watershed study, and if you go from Evanston's north east towards Big Sandy, that white area that's surrounding the Green River, we failed to do a watershed study on that, and that's what you need? Is that what we're focusing on right here with this geographically?
Chairman, Commissioner, no, we're looking at the pinkish, is what it looks like. That's the watershed study for which Sublette County is now asking for funding for. The kind of white that doesn't have really any vibrant color to it is one where a watershed study has yet to be completed.
Any other questions? Any, so thank you.
thanks for your time.
Next project under tab W is the Horse Creek Watershed Study.
Mr. Chairman, the Horse Creek Watershed Study is studies that got postponed last year by the legislature. And I would like to remind everyone that there's a paragraph right under the basic heading of the recommendation that speaks to that, and that the legislation that postponed those watershed studies also stated that these 3 watershed studies would get funded above all other level 1 projects. So just as a little reminder of that. So I have Carrie Ellis here today. And again, she wants to speak to the other uses of the watershed study that their district is looking at, besides entry into the small water project program. So I'd like Carrie to tell you about that.
Mr. Chairman, commissioners, and committee members, thank you for allowing us to come before you today. The watershed, I know that when you were dealing with this last year, it was talked that there have been some studies that have already been done, and we understand that, but we believe that this watershed is bigger than just those studies, and we feel it's important to work on this watershed so we get a better idea of the concerns and the needs beyond what has already been done. And also, there's a watershed study that's being conducted above it, and there's one that's been conducted and done below it. So this would fill that gap.
Questions? Commissioner Evans.
Jody, I have one. What is the division line between the Horse Creek and the Lower Laramie River? Is it I-25 or what there?
Yeah. So if you, I know those, we apologize. We were trying to keep this map as least amount of busyness as possible, as that word. So if you go up, yeah, maybe Sheridan just pointed out to you. So if you, it kind of goes from the north down into, as it travels south, more to the east, or excuse me, to the west, across I-25. It's a light brown line that you see in there that divides. It's kind of hard to see because the Lower Laramie and the Horse Creek are the same color, but that would be the division line of that watershed study.
Thank you.
Yes, and we base these watershed studies on hydrologic unit codes, or HUCs. So that's where those divisions would occur, is where that natural hydrologic boundary would be.
Senator Meyer?
Doesn't that go clear over to Laramie Range? The horse rake area there?
It picks up a little bit of the Laramie Rivers and a little bit of Platte County. Yeah.
I guess my question is, why can't we consolidate this one with the one to the north of it, my rare one, and get the same information other than just the public benefit aspect of it, or I'm trying to get a little efficiency in the amount of dollars that are spent. I don't know if they can consolidate it or not.
Commissioner, Senator, that one, and I think you're referring to the Niobrara Lower North Platte watershed study. That one is currently in process right now. So in order to do that, we would have to contracts and things like that. And I think there's enough, I can't specifically speak to this as I'm not the project manager, and maybe Barry can help me out too, but I think there's probably enough differences in those areas where two could be done. I think you'll also notice that we've taken some care to look at the costs of these watershed studies. So they have been tailored to the specifics of what each of these conservation districts need. So some of the reasons that I know that we've got two of them going on there.
Mr. Chairman, again, this is in my backyard. One of the things that I suggest that you be real careful about are the stop bombs. Because there is about 2 out of 10, about maybe 2 out of 15 years is severe drought. And reservoirs in that area don't get a chance to fill up. So if we would put 125 acre stock ponds out there, you'd possibly have a problem, you know, in a situation where they would actually exasperate the filling of the reservoirs in the county. So, you know, there's some things in there that you gotta be really cognizant of, because it's, some years, like the last 3 years, you had more water and you wouldn't know what to do with it. But in the 70s, sometimes in the early 2000s, it was a struggle to get enough water for everybody to raise a crop. A lot of different reservoirs had to, essentially, they couldn't raise a crop. They went to federal crop insurance, got paid on it because they didn't have enough water to irrigate with. You know, so it's very variable, and that's one of the things I was hoping at one point in time to do with the weather pod. And I don't know whether you guys can address that at all, but if we get to do weather modification, that might mitigate a lot of the things that are going on that's detrimental in what's, you know, in our water supply. So there's some things in there as it goes through that, you know, we'll pay close attention to in that area. But there has been hundreds of thousands of dollars of studies done in the range area. So, you know, that there hasn't been that much up in the Laramie County area and that much below it. So, you know, those are things that whoever's doing this probably, they need to be aware of what's going on. Certainly the last Kinsley report went in and encapsulated reports. Some of the data subsets that might be right now, different measurement stations that are being Mr. Chairman, I think it's probably time to get this show on the road on horse racing.
Bettis.
Quick question. I mean, like, since the water development program started back in the late 70s, have any of the the big watershed's been done by themselves, and now we're into this, I call it sub-watersheds. Or are these sub-watersheds, is this all brand new? I guess what I'm asking is, did they do watershed studies back in the 80s, 90s for the Platte, the Green, is the entire watershed? And then the second part of the question is, did we just start the sub-watershed stuff in the early 2000s?
Mr. Chairman, and this, I'm fairly new to all this, but yeah, I think if you look at the map, then I think maybe just glancing at this, it looks like 2002 was maybe one of the earliest watershed studies that was done. And again, we could talk all day about the history of the Small Water Project Program and watershed studies and how all that's come about. And I think most of you are familiar with that. But one thing we did do river basin plans. We have done those one time and we've gone through with an update. So that's more of what I think you might be addressing as the bigger type watershed. And, just again, in reference to this map, those are some of those big gray lines. But of course, those are kind of the 30,000 foot level view of what's going on in a basin. These watershed studies are going to address specific needs of that particular watershed, which gets down to a more finite look at what's going on the ground.
Then the second part of my question. I think when we talked about these watershed studies last year, I think someone asked about prioritizing those each year. So you have a list here of those that are all rated as a 7. Out of those, what is that, 6 of them? 5. You have a priority for those, even though we agreed to postpone those other ones.
No, and if
Does that change?
And Mr. Chairman, if the reason that we went through that prioritization is because of what happened in the legislature. That's why we did that. And you're asking me to choose between all my children. They're all important. And I know that sounds, but they are. Each of these watersheds has very distinct and different needs. So they're all important. So I would not feel comfortable prioritizing, and I've got people sitting there.
Well, so Mr. Chairman, there was some discussion of that in the context of last year when we had, is it 7 watershed studies, and the legislature provided enough funding for 4. How do you pick which ones of those? We have no written criteria that would give you a guidance document for that. So I think going forward into this year, the legislature has prioritized those 3 as they would be funded first, as Jody indicated. So there's a priority there. And we have 2 additional ones. And my thoughts to you is that there is adequate funding in Water Development Account 1 to do all 5. And at least my recommendation is that we move all 5 of them forward to the legislature. If the legislature chooses not to fund 1 or more of those, then that may come back as to which ones do you pick at this point. But my thoughts are there is adequate funding. The sponsors have brought the applications forward, so they believe that it is important to have this information, and they would like us to move forward with the study. So,
Mr. Chairman, Senator Meyer, and some of the reasons why I think we didn't want to fund all of those, and the same problems existed in this budget. And let's talk a little bit about priorities. We put $400,000 new money into the small water projects. Now, if we're going to do these 5 here, we're going to be well over $1 million. So it's almost a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 times as many dollars are going into studies as to what's actually going on the ground. And from my perspective, we're a water development commission and the Water Development Select Water Committee. We're not developing water, we're studying, we're studying, we're studying. Now, studies are all well and fine, but where the rubber hits the road is where we actually put the money on the ground. And at some point in time, I think that we need to send a clear message to the folks that want to study that we're at least going to have a 50-50 deal here. You know, that we're going to have the same amount of water on the small water projects as we do on studies, at least $1 for dollar. But when you go $2 or $3 on studies and $1 on putting actual money on the ground, you know, it just is frustrating for me to continue to sit there and say, I'm happy with that. I'll leave it at that.
Sure.
Commissioner Evans.
I think the one thing that speaks to that a little bit is the plans last for a multi-year. So if we have 710,000 in the small water project budget, we're going to put more in as the years go by, and that plan cost still be adequate for a decade. So I think in the end there will be quite a bit more projects that come out of those plans than the cost of the studies. So if you look at it that way. So, but I think these are both the Lower Laramie and the Horse Creek are important projects to move on since they were held up. So.
Senator Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, I can argue that we need to put those two studies on. But if you look at the data that we had on the 400,000 small water, you had 33 new projects and only 12 necessarily going to be funded. The time before you only did 9, there was 25 that people had applied. So we're increasing the demand with more and more studies. We're not looking at the demand and understanding that yeah, there's an increase in demand as we put more studies in play, but we're not recognizing that. And so it's like putting your foot on the gas, your foot on the brake, your foot on the gas, your foot on the brake, and we're not going as fast as we should, because we're putting our foot on the brake when we spend more on studies than we're putting on the ground. And that's what I want to get back to, is that we're getting a backlog of projects that are out there. And, you know, it's fine to have a backlog. You don't want to fund everything, but if it's growing, there's a reason it's growing. And that's because we got an imbalance in where our priorities are. And I'm not going to say that we want to stop these studies dead in their tracks, but I do think that we need to look at a policy that says $1 on studies and $1 on projects. We're not going to get as balanced as we are. Now, that's a policy I'd like to see us think about, have some discussion about. So we have that balance. We don't have an increasingly a larger backlog, and we're actually spending money getting things done. But you guys are the committee. You have your own policy. Do what you want to do.
Any more questions? Commissioner Glick.
A lot of these watershed studies are in the blue are done, and while they are the ones that are completed, but if we go back and have to do anything, these watershed studies are still good, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. So a lot of these we won't have to go back and do it. I mean, we're almost getting almost pretty much the state just pretty. I don't see too much more to do compared to what we already have done. I kind of like the idea that we don't have to go back and redo the watershed studies in these areas unless you raise or you make the hub codes smaller and higher number, you know. What code do you use and how small is it? Like 12 or 5 or what?
Mr. Chairman, we usually 10 or 12 is what we use. Yeah.
That's pretty good then, so we don't have to go back and redo some areas. So that way we can go back and do any of our other like feasibility studies and stuff. We already actually want to keep doing everyone.
Yes, for the most part. Yep.
Questions? Commissioner Lancaster?
Well, Senator Meyer, we did two things to try to change the cost of those watershed studies. We're putting them out on bid. And our other hope is that we've simplified them. We've asked for them to be simplified. But I echo your frustration, but we just have to move forward with what we've got right now. And then do the best we can with what we've got right now, I guess.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Is the next one? I don't have my
Middle
agenda.
Bighorn.
Do we have Laura Laramie?
Hold on, I'm sorry, you're right.
Excuse us, we're over here trying to figure out what's going on. Okay, so the next watershed study we have is the Lower Laramie River Watershed Study. Again, this is one that was postponed from last year. So we do have Brady Irvine here today that is the sponsor of this watershed study. So I would like to invite Brady to come on up, and she's also got one of her. Oh, okay. So she's got a board member here that is going to speak. So I will let him introduce himself.
Mr. Chairman, Commission, Kerry Powers, I'm the chairman of the Black County Resource District. And I think, what would you like me to expand on? Just the watershed in general and
Sure.
some of the resources?
Yeah, that would be great.
The Lower Laramie watershed covers over 1.5 million acres and starts up on top of about where the Laramie Plains start. But most of the watershed is in Albany County and Platte County. There's a couple of smaller areas in Laramie County and Goshen County. But within that watershed are many types of resources. There's around 8,500 acres that are under irrigation, somewhere around 4,200 producers, ranging from dryland, cropland to irrigated to rangeland, stock growers, all kinds of production agriculture uses. So the study itself, the level 1 study that we'd like to implement, it's going to help us identify even better those producers and those resources that are out there in that 1.5 million acres. Once that's completed and we have a better idea of just what we've got out there, I think that's going to help us tremendously in then identifying and prioritizing on-the-ground projects to help provide and increase beneficial use of the resource. There's probably some resources out there that we're not even totally familiar with. There's wildlife resources out there that could benefit from some of the things that we might be able to implement as far as practices on the ground. But anyway, it's my feeling that a level 1 study for a small watershed, and in particular this one, would be beneficial.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to also point out that they had some pretty substantial flooding in this area on Seville Creek and on the Laramie River in 2015 and 2016 that really impacted a lot of their diversion structures and created some pretty significant erosion problems. So that is something that needs to be looked at through this watershed study as well.
Questions for the sponsor or for Jody? Commissioner Lancaster?
Ellen, Jody, but there's no way you can combine those two watershed studies.
Well, I guess I would question, are we looking, what are we looking for in that combination? A cost savings?
Already out in the woods. They're already out on the plains.
I guess, well, and I know we've got one project manager here. I don't know that that was something that we looked at. I guess we might be able to look at that and see if that would be something that would be feasible. And we of course want to get with the sponsors and see if that would be something that they would also like to do. I guess, and I'm totally unprepared for this question, so I'm kind of just thinking off the cuff here. A couple of the things that kind of come to mind right off the top of my head is we are looking at a pretty big area here. And of course, when the consultant goes out and looks at these different projects that are on the ground, that's what takes a majority of the time under some of these watershed studies. We've really compressed the time frame of these last year. That's one of the things that happened under the watershed study scope. So we may need to take that into consideration with the larger geographic area. We may need a little bit more time to address everything that's going on in those two areas. But I think I'm looking at Barry too. I think that's something that maybe we could talk about potentially doing. But of course, I'd like to talk to the two project managers of those, and because of course they've got more intimate knowledge of those areas than I do.
Million, what's the other one?
Well, so, Mr. Chairman, just to kind of address that question in general terms, by combining them, you don't reduce the acreage. The acreage stays the same. So that, in terms of a cost to get out on the landscape to look at the projects potentially, that cost does not go down. Is there a resulting in the number of meetings potentially required? I think not, from a standpoint that you are dealing with two separate sponsors. Each sponsor is going to be focused on their particular area of responsibility, and that's why you see these conservation districts have boundaries that sometimes follow the hydrologic boundaries, and so sponsor is going to be focused on their areas. So two sponsors, you may be able to combine a meeting, but it's going to be a joint meeting between the two districts, and I think the ability to deal and customize these to each conservation district is lost in that scenario. So I don't know that there's a reduction in meetings. I think where there is a potential reduction is in the administrative cost of the consultant to manage the project. So they have one project to manage, you're dealing with one consultant. There will be some cost savings there, I believe. But is that going to be significant? Because and I'll go a little bit further, cost of reports. I don't know that you're going to develop one report for both districts because they both have two governing sponsors. So each sponsor is going to want a report that focuses on their area, deals with their issues. And so I think you're still looking at two reports in that regard. So potentially there will be some cost savings. I don't know that it's going to be that significant. So
I would also add that the point of watershed studies is to be small. The bigger you get, the closer to a river basin plan you get. And so you're just getting a more, higher 30,000 foot view of the watershed. And the point is for them to be small. And so I'm all for combining them if it's possible. And that may be a cost savings, but at the same time, you might lose some of what you're trying to study too.
Half of your information.
yeah, you might be losing, yeah, half your information, as Jerry just said. So that's,
Asking because I was going to make a point that it's not really be a cost saving. The cost.
it may be a cost savings, but it may be a cost savings at the expense of good data too. So that's the thing I would caution. It may be fine, it may not. And if you guys want to look into that, that'd be great. But at the same time, I would just caution that, you know, maybe you're saving money, but you're not getting as good of a product in the end. So.
Spread too thin.
Yep, spread too thin, exactly. So, any other questions for the sponsor, for Jody? Senator Moniz?
Jody, my question is related to the cost on these variety of watershed studies. How was the cost arrived at?
Mr. Chairman, so again, we've heard, of course, lots of discussions about this in the past, and our project managers went through, last year, we did a pretty good revamp of the watershed study scope to really get that tightened up. And then with that scope, the project managers visited with all of their sponsors, and we've kind of got a suite of different things that could happen in a watershed study. And they went through and decided what are the things that the conservation district or the resource district needed, and those that they didn't. And so even though, you know, we're not to that process yet, the project managers have looked at that RFP and have visited with their sponsors to determine what needs to be done in a watershed. So you'll see different budget amounts in here speaking to that very thing of just what does that district need under that watershed study. I think it's more, no, I would say it's a little bit more than that, because of course we've got some pretty good history of what we know watershed studies cost. And again, we know certain tasks and what they cost. And if that task is not going to be in that budget, it's going to be taken out. So that's, again, why these are reflected these different ways. Some of the watershed studies need to have those tasks left in. Some of them will have them taken out.
The discussion we had earlier was that when we advertise what the proposed budget is, amazingly, the bid is about what we propose for the budget to be. Why do we put a number there at all? Just to allow for a budgeting process, or?
That's correct, because as it stands right now, because of course these are following our, that was August 15th was the due date. So that's the process that we follow. Now, as we go into the future and we have the new March 1st date, there will no longer be any budget amounts on these.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
So now Middle Bighorn.
All right, and now we will move to the Middle Bighorn River Watershed Study. Again, this was the last of the 3 that were postponed from last year. So we do have 2 people here, and I believe Tori Dietz and George Kelso are here to speak to some of the other benefits that they see from this watershed study and what their districts would like to see come out of this. So I will turn it over to you guys.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm George Kelso from the South Bighorn Conservation District. As far as the needs of why we applied for this study, our district had been approached by a couple of small drainage districts who had firmly believed that a level 1 study would be of benefit to them, but because of the size of their districts, they really weren't eligible to come in and look for a level 1 study. And so they came and asked us, would we try to incorporate a larger area and then request a study that they could benefit from. And so we kind of started on that basis, and at the same time we could see there were some large areas within our region which did not have any level 1 studies. And so we tried to come up with a study that basically filled some of those gaps within the studies. And in that process, we had worked with Washakie County Conservation District on their area to see if they thought that that approach might work for them as well. And that was kind of the basis for it. And at the time, the other basis for us was the small water projects program, because we were getting tired of telling producers on one side of the river that we'd bring their project, and producers on the other side of the river that they could go home again because we couldn't help them. And I know that's eliminated now, but we've always had concerns about where the bar is when it comes to a public benefit determination on any individual project. And so we felt that a level 1 would still provide us with some benefit that way for our producers who want to do projects. We've had some other goals in this. Recently, we had worked with the BLM on the and for the Bighorn Basin, and we felt that a level 1 would probably have provided us with a lot better information to work as a cooperating agency with the BLM. And then there, I think, are a number of other issues. We've currently are working with the National Water Quality Initiatives grant through NRCS near Manderson. And we felt a study like this will help us to target some of our other efforts towards water management and sediment management. Tori?
Tori Dietz, Mr. Chairman in the Commission. The Conservation District in Worland, the Board of Directors, our main focus, there has been discussion in the past on small water projects. However, our main focus always has been, we've seen the outcome of some of the neighboring level 1 studies that have come about with the baseline information and the pooling of all that in one place to use as an umbrella for a funding, I guess, identification of projects and inventory information. And we have some fairly old water rights and older structures in our area, in the Worland area anyway. Just to have that information is valuable to go after any funding source for individual projects. So the value to us was having it all in one place identified so that we could begin to prioritize on our other projects. So.
Sponsor? Okay, no questions?
Go for it. Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, the next project under tab B is the Osage Water Master Plan. As you can see from the legislative history, this particular entity was active with water development in the 1990s. In fact, we had a pretty good project in 1997, but nothing since then. And so the request that's coming forward is that now, after about 20 years, it's elapsed since the last project, to run a master plan to look at all aspects of their system, to again look at the any issues that have surfaced, and then of course propose solutions to any deficiencies that might be identified. Looking at again the supply, the storage, the transmission and distribution part of the system. So the budget request is $190,000 for this master plan.
Well, I'm Joe Wood, one of the board members. The reason why we did this is we're just now getting our loans paid off that we had. And I think with WWDC, we'll have those loans paid off in a month or two. But when we stuck that new system in, some of the lines was deadheaded, and so we have to flush our system a little bit more, and we need to still do some upgrades, some old steel lines and stuff. When we need a master plan, some point of direction to actually go there. But that is our intent for this.
Question of the sponsors? Sponsor?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Bud Fallon.
So are you bigger or smaller than Saratoga?
Smaller. We have probably, I think there's 208 at the last census.
Okay, well, I'm looking at the budget and it's got you guys at 190,000, but Saratoga, who's bigger, at 165, and I'm just wondering why the difference.
I don't know what their rates are, but that with this plan, hopefully we get to find out about what everybody's rates are in the state compared to ours. And in our paperwork, you have our rates, but you know, and I don't know what other people's rates are, but that's what ours is based off of, and our expenditures. And so compared to Saratoga, I don't know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Harry.
just one thought there. Saratoga more recently has upgraded their water supply system. They've moved from surface water to wells, and so they have a set of newer wells. And while I didn't personally put the budgets together, I think there's more of a water supply focus with regards to Osage. That's the only reason I can really offer as to a difference. We can look at adjusting those budgets, you bring them in close to each other, but certainly from a Saratoga standpoint, I would say that their water supply is it's much newer water supply, so less focus on with regards to the study.
I just want to clarify, I'm not arguing for a uniform budget. I just thought there ought to be a reason that they're not the same.
Any other questions of the sponsor? Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, next project is the Paposia Watershed Study Phase 2, and I will invite Jody back up to discuss this project along with the next, this one and 3 others that are all dealing with water planning.
Mr. Chairman, the Paposia Watershed Study Phase 2, back in 2003, I think it was when that was finished. There was a watershed study done for the Paposia River area. The district has used that. They've done some projects from that. But in the years since that was completed, they have really honed in on different areas that they feel there can be some other benefits that they would like to investigate through a watershed study. So I have Dave Morneau here, excuse me, with the Conservation District to talk to that. And I think, Regine, are you gonna also address some of that? So I'll let them introduce themselves and speak to what this watershed study Phase 2 is all about.
Yeah, so I'm Dave Morneau, Acting District Manager, Paposia Conservation District. Regine Struby-Fossen is Assistant Mayor, City of Lander, and she's a core member of our working group, the Paposia Healthy River Initiative. And then I also have Arlen Lancaster here. He's a board member. In a study 3 new topics that were not previously examined in 2003, and they are micro storage, holistic irrigation infrastructure improvements, and groundwater storage. And since 2003, we've implemented at least 38 producer-driven projects totaling $2.8 million. Several years after that study, in 2008 and 2009, 2 irrigation groups applied for level 2 funding and level 3 funding, totaling $600,000. That was 5 projects, and half of that money was Wyoming Water Development Commission funds. Is there any questions?
Questions of the sponsor? Commissioner Bud Fallon.
I am not excited about redoing watershed studies, especially when redoing an old watershed study is $235,000. I mean, I don't understand why we didn't deal with some of these issues in the first watershed study, and how are we going to assure that whoever gets this watershed study isn't just going to spend part of our money regurgitating all the stuff they already did in the first watershed study? I mean, I really did think these watershed studies were supposed to last a really long time. And as my friend Jeanette would say, the rivers didn't move, the mountains didn't move. I mean,
Commissioner Geis.
Was this the meeting I attended to over there, and there's 52 private ditches in this area, and we could maybe consolidate some of those head gates into one? That's what you're wanting to do in this, is get a handle on where we could cut down on so many private ditches. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Geis, for bringing that up. The Healthy River Initiative that is, while we're not regurgitating information, we feel like these are three unique areas of study. Carrying what we've done already further, like I said, we've already had well over $3 million invested based on the first watershed study, and only 10% of that or less was water development funds. Remember that we use these level 1 studies to leverage our other funding sources also, like the State Land Investment Board and NRCS, and we do use these studies to leverage other funding sources. But the reason that we think that this is a furthering and unique from the first study is because the first study looked at traditional storage areas, and we're looking at micro storage areas, hoping to take advantage of our gradient and our smaller projects, and perhaps advantage of some small water projects for that. We're also talking about what Commissioner Geis related to, and that is an examination of taking all these individual small irrigation ditches and cooperating and collaborating with all of our uses. 96% of our water is agricultural use, but we have a lot of other users. We have recreational, we have municipal, we have erosion down, flood mitigation, we have augmentation of our sole source snowmelt waters. And those are the things that we're trying to mitigate with this by combining some of these smaller interests into one large district, or we don't know what that will look like yet. That's why we are asking for the study funds. But we think we can leverage that just like we did the first study. Also, the third unique area is something that was not looked at in the level 1 study, and that is the opportunity that we have with our karst, a lot of karst formations, to look at underground storage and underground augmentation of water for our current system. So we believe that those are three unique areas.
Mr. Chairman, the one thing I would add to that is that if you look at underground storage in this state, not much of that has been done. In the 2000s, I'm aware that Water Development got involved in 2 projects for Cheyenne and Laramie. But to my knowledge, while it's been done in other states, it's something that's rather new in this particular state. So that would be a reason why it was not looked at in 2003 with the earlier study. So again, have been brought forward, and we've got to take a look at it from a feasibility issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Jody, I know that you guys worked very hard on refining scopes for the different areas. So am I to assume now that the scope for this particular project will be focused on those 3 areas and not going back and looking at the things? I mean, and that you've priced that out for those 3 areas so that you're the consultant's going to be putting together a full program, but they're not going to be going back and studying the same thing they studied in 2003. So you have refined this, or the RFP will reflect that this is what is being asked for. I guess I'm assuming that, and is my assumption accurate?
Chairman, yes, your assumption is accurate. That, yeah, and I am the project manager on this. We will not be going back and asking them to do the things that we have already done. And the three different areas there are specifically what we're going to concentrate on. And the underground storage, we knew that that was going to be a little bit more because again, that's not an area that's been explored all that much. So that's why the budget is just a little bit higher in there. But so you will see this scope for this project will be even different than ones that you've seen before because it will solely concentrate on these three areas.
And I'm visual. So at the end, you're going to actually have a watershed study that is a compilation of two watershed studies for this group to have. I mean, the one from 2003 and this one. So you're going to have a big watershed study that probably won't need to be done again for maybe in my lifetime, I guess. So.
At least on these topics, yes. I guess I'm hesitant to say, never say, I'm never going to say never, but I think, these are areas back in 2003 that weren't even on the radar, I think, for a lot of this. They looked at traditional storage like they do in a lot of the watershed studies. A lot of that became non-feasible. I think there's ways now with technology and the ways that can improve irrigation that these micro storage facilities became something kind of on the horizon, along with this underground storage. And then of course, as we've moved through time, I think, and these two experts here can speak more to this irrigation infrastructure and being able to combine some things. There's a lot of things that have happened even in the watershed itself that I think lends to looking at more of that and being a little bit more prudent about how that can be accomplished.
Chair, I want to follow up on what Karen said. I know from my municipal experience that a master plan, after 10 or 15 years, you got to redo it because, growth patterns change, subdivisions come in and population changes. So I know that, and I'm sure consultants would agree with that. On a watershed plan, this one, the existing one's 15 years old. What's the lifespan of a watershed plan? Is it much longer than like a master plan, which is of course for your municipality? Help me understand how long a watershed plan is supposed to last, because I think I know that for a master plan for a municipal situation, but I don't know the answer that Karen had.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, I don't know what the length is, but I know talking to producers just recently this past week that projects that were identified in the 2003 watershed study are still relevant today. As many of you know, as ditch operators, a lot of maintenance is done reactively. So not all the time can they do proactive projects. So I don't think the 2003 watershed plan is unuseful anymore. We're planning on this phase 2 will complement those, but it's not replacing the 2003 watershed study. I mean, we had projects that were just done up to just last year that were still on this list. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeanette suggested maybe they last for the rest of her life. I don't know if they're supposed to last 30. I don't know if those are supposed to be 30 or 40 years. If you could think through a little bit how long a watershed study should last, I'd like to know a range, because that helps me with master plans to know how long they should last when you propose them. I'd like to know what people think how long a watershed plan should last.
Here. I'd also like to address that question. Again, from your municipality, master plans last different varied amounts of time, and I think the same is true for watershed studies. Part of it has to do with how you act on those. So where we have acted on the original watershed study back from 2003, and like I said, accomplished a lot of projects off of that, then as new ideas come in and as new technologies come in, then perhaps it's obsolete faster because we've acted on some of those other ideas.
So let's fund them and not use them so they last longer.
No, no, no.
Other questions? Sir? Okay, thank you.
Next project, Mr. Chairman, the river basin planning is the GIS data model implementation.
All right, I'll switch gears here. So, Mr. Chairman, if you recall back at our August meeting, Peter and I gave a presentation on where we see the future of river basin planning. And as you recall, we've gone through the state twice now, once for one sweep for river basin plans and a second to update those plans. We feel that that's really not needed. We're going to quote my commissioner friend Jeanette, mountains don't move, rivers don't change that much. So we really want to take a more statewide approach to with river basin planning. We think that's going to be a lot more productive. So in August, we presented 5 different options that we were going to bring to you to consider for river basin planning. We thought about that a little bit more and have combined them into 3 options that you see here before you today, outlined in these 3 recommendations that we put together. So I'm going to address the first one, being the GIS data model implementation. And this really goes on to do some more work. Currently, we're wrapping up the Bear River data model pilot study. We talked a little bit about that in August. So this just goes into more of the recommendations that came out of that study of what we should do across the state to better our understanding of what's going on the ground. So one of the big things that they talked about was water infrastructure. So we've heard a lot today about infrastructure problems that irrigation districts have, municipalities and such. And as our office invests a lot of, and you invest a lot of money into this infrastructure, we think it would be a really good idea to have a real good handle on where all that infrastructure lies. We kind of equate it to, Game and Fish knows where the habitat is. DEQ knows where their point source problems are, most of them. So again, we should probably have a pretty good handle on where our infrastructure is. And we think that will also help as we see funds diminishing. We can use this as a tool to start thinking about where those infrastructure problems are going to be and be maybe on the front end of that instead of the back end of it, to help districts and site and producers out there figure out where those problems are going to be on the horizon and where we can start to help them mitigate that. So that's that first project. And also with a lot of that information, it can be transferred into the different projects that we have. So again, we're looking for ways to save money. So if we come up with this basic water infrastructure data, that information can then be given to other level 1 and 2 projects and say, here you go, here's that information, do not recreate this. We've already done this for you. Just build on this and then help this irrigation district or help this rural water system figure out what it is their next steps are going to be. So that's the GIS data model implementation part of that. And I think it might help if I just run through all of these because they kind of all weave together just a little bit, and then I'll answer any questions that you guys have. So the next one is the NHD plus HR and stream stats phase 1 and 2. This is another project that we talked about in August. And the NHD plus HR part of this deals with the National Hydrography Data Set. And that's a data set that was put together some time ago. It's the representation of the water surface features that are found on the ground. So bringing it up to what's called now NHD plus HR is a higher resolution of that NHD. So we need to take a look at that data a little bit more closely because in order to make the model work, which then is what I'll speak to in the next part of this, things have to match up. So as GIS and resolutions have gotten better and better through the years, we can make things click together a little bit better. And it would be best if I had a picture. I'm very visual too. I need a drawing board. But if we've got a stream, sometimes it doesn't snap to the next stream because they just didn't have the resolution to do that. Now that they do, they can make all of those streams snap to the one that's its tributary and make these models run better. So that's what is going to happen with the NHD plus HR part of this. The phase 1 and 2 then is when we move into stream stats. So building on that layer that we have, then we move into developing some basin characteristics of these different watersheds. And we've got about, I think, 355 stream gauges out there in the state of Wyoming right now. We need to analyze those stream gauges and see which one of those are best to use. We need ones that have 10 years of record or better to start looking at regression equations. Regression equations then give us some statistics on which we can run some probabilities. So that's what this second part is. We would look at both gauged and ungauged areas because we do have parts of our state that don't have stream gauges. So equations would need to be based on those as well without the benefit of having a stream gauge there to have those hard, fast numbers. And then again, looking again towards that cost savings is what we're kind of focused on is we really see this stream stats as a tool that's able to replace what we currently use, which is spreadsheet models in a lot of our studies. So we completely get rid of the spreadsheet model, move right into stream stats. Spreadsheet models are pretty time consuming for a lot of our consultants because they do have to build these regression equations. So we pay a lot of consultant hours for them to be able to go through that. We see them not having to do that anymore because we've got this, we will have the stream stats program. And that's even something that you and I can use as well. If it's not, it's something that's going to be very, very web-based. And then I'll move into the third project, which is the water supply index. Again, this is another one of these products that we took a look at river basin planning and really concentrated on where people are using the information the most. And water supplies and how those trend over time is something that people have a lot of interest in. So again, this would be a statewide view of our water supplies over time. It would really improve our understanding around the state of where we've got areas in most need of additional or supplemental supply. And these trend analysis right now are hard for us to do because we have such a big gap of time between when we've done one river basin plan update and the next one. You know, it could be up to 10 years. You can't really do a trends analysis with that. So we would provide this information to our consumers, our constituents, in a publication, be it a hard copy or an electronic version of that. And again, it would talk to, it would speak to the historic data that we have and looking at those trends. It's not a water forecast tool, but it's more of an analysis of, okay, things are trending this way. Is that something that I can look to this summer? You know, things are looking about the same and help in some planning, help producers in some planning. And it would speak to the legally and really physically available water, making those comparisons. And this project would give us the ability to build that, to develop that baseline and help Peter and I do that. We're right now a division of 2 people. But from that point forward, then this is something that we could do in-house. So we would be able to produce those reports either on an annual or biannual basis right from our office once we get the baseline developed. And then we see too, many of you have attended what we call our Wyoming Water Update meetings, formerly called our Basin Advisory Group meetings. Again, because we have 2 people in our office, we would be really more able to focus our public relations outreach into the areas where we know there's the greatest need and really concentrate on helping those areas think about how best to use the water that they do have. And with that, I take any questions, and I also have Peter here to help me field any of those that you may have.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. Under first item, GIS data model, is that money being spent on hardware or software or data? What exactly is the money being spent?
Well, what we would need to do is look at, we probably would use a lot of remote imagery products that are already out there. That wouldn't cost us anything to look at that kind of thing. A lot of that is available out there, either for low or no cost. So we would use that. But right now we really need, again, we're a two-person office, so we need to have somebody kind of develop that baseline infrastructure layer for us. So it would be getting that information in. Correct.
We can do this
And
in-house over time, because you said there was no time constraints on this. I guess what I'm wondering is there any way we could order all of this in-house?
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, I think part of this money would go towards funding of a consultant to help develop the data sets, which we would also oversee and very closely work on in-house. That's why the cost to do this statewide is fairly low, because we would be very actively involved in the development of these data.
Go ahead, Nick. No, come back to you.
Tell me the same thing about this, the other one, the street side stats, page 22. Is that on the order of the same thing? In other words, I guess, if we get a consultant in there to give us whatever he's going to give us, but the software is out there, to me, you're just telling me that he's going to put it in right, and then we'll be able to use that, which is already out there, for our client.
well, I'll address your, Mr. Chairman, I will address your question about stream stats first. So this would be something that we strictly would ask for help with through what's called WGISC, the Wyoming Geographic Information Science Center, and also USGS. So we would enter into an agreement with both of those entities for the NHD plus HR and stream stats. It's a cooperative program, correct? Yeah. And stream stats, I'm assuming, is a proprietary program with the USGS. So it's their software. But then they would develop all of the regression equations, the basin characteristics, and we would work in close cooperation with them to decide what those statistics would be, what we need the most for the state of Wyoming.
So is there any chance we could gather enough information that this could take over and we wouldn't need watershed studies anymore? That's a lot of information you're gathering.
That's correct. And I think really our focus is on is really moving towards, and we talked a little bit about this in August as well, is some type of decision support system for our state. And we're really this is launching us into that. So I don't really see, it's kind of apples and oranges. So the watershed studies really address particular problems on the ground. A DSS would be able to run scenarios on our water availability, what we owe downstream states, all that type of thing. But we've got to have the information to be able to plug into a decision support system. And these projects are that direction that we're really wanting to take. And more on that's why we want to go out and gather it on a statewide level instead of going basin by basin and doing one and then 10 years later doing another. It's with consistent information on that one particular feature that can be then starting to plug into a decision support system.
Senator Meyer.
Relatively a short period of time in a hydrological cycle as far as what you could actually interpolate or use in regression analysis to make a determination from that point in time in the future what's actually going to be the stream to make decisions whether or not you can build a dam or not build a dam. I will say it's better than nothing, and it's better than what we have right now with people doing the same thing, you know, with spreadsheets. But the problem that we have, and it's a budget problem in a lot of ways, is that a lot of stream gauge stations have been taken out of service. Either we can't maintain them or we don't have people to read them. And if we're going to get a full picture of it, we're going to need, you know, we're going to need to quadruple our effort, I think, in putting together stream gauges and having the maintenance and making the effort to make sure that the data that we put in the analysis is sufficient. You may have enough in some watersheds, but I know in the area where we're around that there's been a lot of them taken out. We have that data. Big areas missing. So, you know, I think that if you're going to move forward with this and you're going to have something you can actually say, you know, hang your hat on, we're going to need to get some more field data in there. So there's a higher level of confidence that I like to, because I can't rely on confidence as far as what I know about my area. I don't know about Bear River or, you know, the Big Horn Basin, or this and that. And in those cases, maybe there's enough gauges up there. Maybe they've been around long enough. 10 years is a minimum. You should have, you got data for 25 or 30, and you got enough of it. You can probably really hang your hat on that. But I'm really concerned that moving to phase 4, we don't have enough to input into the regression analysis to give us quality.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I might have not made that very clear. So the 355 stream gauges that we do have 10 years or more of record. 10 years is the minimum. So we've got more stream gauges out there. We just can't use them because the 10 years is the minimum that we need. So all of these 355 plus that we have more than 10 years of record. It could be 25, you know, it could be more than that. Those are the ones that we're going to look at to get that more convincing probability of what's going on out there. So even a stream gauge that's only had 1 or 2 or 5 years, that falls out of the mix. It's going to be those that have 10 years or more of record. And in those areas where there's not stream gauges, that's where we really need those regression equations, because we don't have that data to rely on to give us that information. So these basin characteristics that are going to be developed under this stream stats are going to be based on digital elevation models, all kinds of information that could be input into the system to give us the most practical information without having an actual stream gauge out there. And again, it's the best that we can do when we don't have a stream gauge, but when we can draw a line and we've got a lot of information at a higher resolution these days than we've ever had before, we've got some more certainty where we can run some statistics that will give us some pretty reliable information.
Mr. Chairman, in certain areas, I think that I question reliability. And I don't want you to dismiss saying that you might have to add to that 385, or you might have to put a degree of confidence when you do your work in certain areas of the state. Necessarily got a higher degree of confidence in some areas than other areas. So, you know, and as I said, I think this is better than what we're doing now. But I don't think it's good enough probably to spend $50 million on a dam in some areas. That might not be at that confidence level. So, you know, when you move forward with this, if it gets funded, then, you know, look at before you're really saying that we got a 100% degree of confidence that this is how much water can be in the watershed or how much water can flow in the stream. We look at augmenting with more stream gauges and more data. Because we could find ourselves in a situation where we rely on a model and the model just doesn't
Commissioner Bud found.
So is it your intent that these 3 studies or some combination replace river basin plans, and in the next 3 years, you're not going to be coming back and asking for updates on river basin plans?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. This is the new direction that we feel that is best for the information that we need to get out there, and looking at more of a statewide view of things is where we think we need to go.
Sure. Have you looked at other items that may be comparable to what you're requesting here? Is this the only one you looked at?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Sugar, are you talking about?
About these 3 items things you want to employ?
Yeah, I think we have lots of big ideas about things that we want to, this is just the basis. These are one of the things that we thought we could tackle right now. Again, looking to the future and decision support model, we're going to need to really hone in on what those pieces of information are that we need. And this is what we think is a good first step into launching into that decision support model.
You answered my question, and that's a first step element that you're requesting today.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Bettis.
Question. We haven't written the RFPs for any of these river basin or for any of these watershed studies yet. When they present their final draft of this, this form that you need to be in for the river basin study, for the stream cap study.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, that is the idea behind the Bear River Data Model Pilot Study, is that we are going to standardize the spatial data collection models that all our projects use, or at least on the planning side, so that we will be developing these data sets over time. And that one of the things this will do will provide some baseline for those level 1 studies, so they won't have to spend as much money on the data development, because we're going to do it consistently across the state the first time. And so we're trying not to ever have to duplicate data sets anymore as we go forward. Does that answer your question?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could just add a little bit to that.
What I'm trying to get at here is that you're going to do these watershed studies. Some of them anyway, I would guess. Is there any way when you request the final format that the data be in, that a lot of that work that you're trying to get done in this streamlined stat thing, that we can save any money on that end by getting some of that, I guess, information and or hardware, software knowledge through that?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bettis, I think where we see more of the applicability of what I think you're talking about is really in the other 2 projects, not so much the stream stats. But I think these other 2, as Peter mentioned, we have implemented in our office a baseline for how we want GIS information to come into our office. So for instance, on this water supply index, water infrastructure is a big thing that is looked at under these watershed studies. So we are asking the consultants now, okay, here's some core data sets that we need from you, and this is how we want it to come into our office, so that we can then plug it into a decision support system. Because right now, we don't really have a standardization of how that information comes into our office. So we don't have a way to finally put it into a model. So that's so that every planning study now and the watershed studies have a clause in there that says, you will give us this GIS information in this format. We've had training in our office with our project managers on how that information is to come in. So that will definitely pour into two of these projects because that will help us build those baseline data layers that we need. But we also have areas where we've got to build on that.
Any other questions? Senator Anselmi Dalton.
Thank you, Chairman. Jody, I was just curious, on the next page, you say that we might be able to get funding for phase 3 and phase 4 of this project from other states and federal organizations. I mean, are they interested in this data, or who's proposing to help us out, and what kind of thoughts do you have on how much that would be?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for asking that question, Senator. Yeah, so we go to these groups called, one of them is Water Forum that the State Engineer's Office does, and we have state and federal agencies there. When we made this pitch about coming for some funding for stream stats, I was approached by the Bureau of Land Management, and they expressed an interest in having some money that they may be able to put into this project. I would mention that the BLM did put a pretty big chunk of change in for the state of Wyoming when the NHD was first developed. But and quite to my surprise, I had a gentleman, Paul Godfrey from the BLM, say that, he had some money that he would be willing. Probably, he mentioned in the range of about $5,000 to $10,000. But I think there's ways that we might be able to leverage some of that too. We've also talked to YDOT about stream stats, because this is, of course, a program that they can use in the design of culverts and bridges and that type of thing. So we have talked to them, and I think as we move forward with this, we'll need to have some more conversations about how they can benefit from this and talking to them about some of their support. For the NHD plus part of this, we will be asking for stewards to come forward, which would be in-kind services to help us go through the NHD. And so we've had quite a few agencies offer that, DEQ, Game and Fish. We've had some conversations with the State Engineer's Office. So if they can't provide money, they will be providing in-kind services of the people to go through and help bring that up to where it needs to be.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, moving on, then the next project under tab G is the Saratoga Water Master Plan. Interestingly, I'll point out that the last Saratoga Master Plan that was done was 2002. As you can see, there's been some work, as I mentioned earlier, about their water supply moving to a groundwater source. But their request now is to perform a comprehensive master plan for their entire system. And the budget we've established for that is $175,000. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Commission members, my name is John Winter. I am the Public Works Director for the town of Saratoga. I'd like to take this opportunity to, on behalf of the town as well as our Carbon County and Saratoga Impact Joint Powers Board, to thank the Commission for consideration of our application. And so any questions that you may have.
Questions of the sponsor? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, under tab H then is the next project. This is the Sheridan Municipal Watershed Wildfire Hazard Mitigation Assessment. This is the first time this type of project has been brought to the Commission for funding. I will tell you that 2 other of these studies have been completed and managed by Water Development Office staff, and those were for the city of Cheyenne and for the town of Buffalo. What they represent, and that was, they were funded through funds from the governor's office that were remaining after the governor's forest task force. And it was really impetus from the task force that came out with a recommendation to conduct these assessments so that we can start proactively managing the forests in these very critical public municipal watersheds. And of course, I think I mentioned an example yesterday, the Hayman fire in 2002, and how devastating it was and costly to the city and county, or for the Denver Water Board, because it increased the cost significantly for providing safe drinking water to their communities. So the idea is that when these assessments are complete, we can hand these to the Forest Service, who manages most of the forested lands in this state, and ask them to start prescribing forest treatments in these critical areas that would ultimately lead to the better ability to fight fires if and when these fires break out. We had a conversation yesterday. I just wanted to add to that conversation that the Buffalo fire mitigation study, when we handed that to the Bighorn National Forest, they have now included that in an environmental assessment going forward as they start to develop timber sales in that forest. So it has had a positive effect already. Sheridan has watched that process go forward. There was not enough money initially to include Sheridan. If you look at the target right now is municipal watersheds, but there are other watersheds dealing for agricultural purposes. That would be a secondary priority. So as we look around the state, there's really 4 watersheds that have a municipal impact. I've mentioned now 3. Cheyenne, Buffalo, and Sheridan. The other one is Lander. They have a surface water supply up above their community, and so ultimately we might be looking at an additional assessment in that area. So the budget for this, $165,000. With that, I would turn it over to the sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dan Coughlin. I'm the project manager for the Sheridan Area Water Supply Joint Powers Board. You may recall that that Joint Powers Board is comprised of the mayor of Sheridan and 2 council people and 3 commissioners from Sheridan County. We thought we were the rightly positioned sponsor for this project. We've watched the Buffalo project very closely. We are participants in the Bighorn National Forest Roadless Collaborative. We work with the Forest Service and the Wyoming State Forestry throughout that process. We have a watershed, a source water protection plan that we've accomplished. We have a watershed control plan as part of that. And we've worked with the same team that was involved in the Buffalo. Any questions?
I have a really hard time with this study because I have seen hundreds of pages saying that the way to help protect and mitigate for fires is cutting trees. So I think the information that you're looking for in this study has been reproduced, maybe not for Sheridan, but 1,000 other times. And so I don't understand what new you want from water development for $165,000. I mean, the Forest Service knows that it needs to manage its timber. Unless those people are asleep or dead, they know what they need to do based on all of these dead and down trees. And so I'm all for convincing the Forest Service that it needs to go out and hold some type of timber sales to be able to fix this problem. I'm just not sure what you're going to get for $165,000 that's different than what those guys already have. I mean, it's a political decision not to manage trees. It's not a resource decision. They were going to do the right thing for the resource. They go cut the trees.
Mr. Chairman, let me attempt to answer this, and I'm looking to Representative Paxton because some of these discussions happened on the Forest Task Force. So the National Forest System, Forest Service, is charged with managing most of the forest lands. And I would agree, and some of the testimony we had is that they are not managing for timber production at all. We have mills in the state that have closed. We have mills in the state that are starving for timber. And So the question becomes, how do we compel or assist the Forest Service in trying to move timber sales forward? So one of the things that Forest Service representatives talked about in this task force was get into roadless areas. There's only about, and I can't recite the reasons, there's only about 3 reasons that you can get into roadless areas. One of those deals with public safety and health. And so this, when we deal with municipal jurisdiction or municipal watersheds, we can bring a public health aspect into this, that we're trying to protect public infrastructure in the form of these reservoirs in these locations. And so the studies, one of the main aspects of the studies is you don't focus on the whole forest. You focus on the municipal watershed because we have a municipal reservoir there. And then you start to say, okay, if there are fires, what are the most likely directions that they may come from? Wind-driven fires, you get into the weather aspect. Where is the predominant wind pattern? So that sets up generally where you would expect water or fires if they start to come from. Okay, and then you also look at specific geologic and forest aspects in the watershed to say, if we know the general direction that we would expect fires to come from, where might we start to tailor treatments? And treatments, when I say treatments, treatments involve cutting trees down. So where might we strategically put these treatments so that we are better able to fight fires in the future? And it is that kind of a report then that when we hand it to the Forest Service, one, there is a significant public safety and health issue here that elevates it for them. And 2, it goes to pinpoint, we think there are treatments needed in this specific area and this specific area. And we can tie that into, for example, non-forested landscape. If you tie, you're trying to build a fire break in essence. And so it is that kind of planning that comes out of this report that the Forest Service can use to elevate it as they then bring timber sales to the forefront. And it does elevate it in their priority system of where are we going to put timber treatments there. Here's a reason that they should be doing it in these particular jurisdictions. So that's what the report does for us. And there are the side benefits that then we are harvesting trees that ultimately can feed some of the mills within the state.
Mr. Chairman, the Forest Service already knows this stuff. Forest Service isn't going to be able to go out and do a timber treatment without a whole bunch of NEPA and going through a whole bunch of other stuff. I just think we're spending money that's going to have to get restudied and redone all over again. It's not that like we're doing a NEPA document so that you can actually go out and get it cut. It's still a political decision by the Forest Service. The Forest Service knows that there is a public health and safety. I did litigation for poor little Tombstone, Arizona. They had catastrophic wildfire in a roadless area. They went in and tried to fix their water. Forest Service made the political decision not to let them do it. Shut down the water supply in that town. Shut it off. Went to the district court, had to go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, ended up in front of the Supreme Court. It wasn't a resource decision. It was a political decision. And I think we're going to spend $100 and however much $1,000 to write this really nice report. It's going to make us all feel good. And I don't think you're going to get $195,000 or what, $165,000, I don't have my glasses on, whatever it is. You're not going to get that much benefit out of it because we're not going to be able to trace it back and say, yep, they cut that many trees. I think it's sort of like what Senator Myers was talking about before. Right now, we have this huge imbalance of we're spending a ton of money on studies, not that same sort of equal balance of money on stuff that's on the ground we got to do something with. And maybe we need to spend the money because Ogden's going to tell me that if you don't spend the money out of this account, legislature is going to rob it and put it in schools or something, whatever you're going to rob it for. Whoever is going to rob. I mean, so maybe we need to spend the money just because we need to spend the money. But I think we need to be realistic about what we're going to get out of this study. And there's not a chance you're going to convince me that the Forest Service is going to cut $1,000. What is it? $165,000 worth of trees based on this study. I will never believe that in a million years.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Evans.
I guess, I think the proof's in the pudding, and I think we can test hypothesis. What we're trying to do is protect Wyoming communities, okay? And Karen's suggesting that this study's not going to produce anything tangible that helps protect those city facilities. We've done a study for Cheyenne, for Laramie, for Buffalo, apparently.
Cheyenne and Buffalo.
Okay, so my question is, did it result in help protect those water supply systems coming out of the mountains? Either it did or it didn't. If it didn't, Karen's correct. If it did, then somehow these studies are doing something to lead the Forest Service to help protect our communities' water supply systems. So what happened in Cheyenne and Buffalo is my question.
Those reports were just completed in the last year, so they have not worked their way through this Forest Service process. What we have noticed is from the Bighorn National Forest is they are now starting an EA with regards to and utilizing recommendations out of the Buffalo study. I agree with Commissioner Bud Fallon that it is a political decision. What I would say to you is that this type of a report, political instrument that we bring to the Forest Service and say, as you do your forest planning, this is a priority area. And Buffalo, they have taken that report, and as I related to you, the now retired forest supervisor said he very much appreciated that. It brought focus and priority to that particular drainage. And so I believe that it will have a positive effect. It's too early to tell with regards to the two previous reports that have been completed. So, but it is a political instrument as we go to the Forest Service and say, you do need to have timber treatments, and this is a priority area for the city of Sheridan, from the water development, certainly from the state of Wyoming.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. When would you expect to see whether this results for these two communities? Next year?
Mr. Chairman, the Dam and Reservoir Division managed those two projects for Buffalo and Cheyenne. And Harry's correct that Buffalo is being incorporated into the EA for the Buffalo Watershed Project. And what I've read is the implementation is planned for 2019. And also for the Cheyenne Medbo, they're doing what they're calling the LAVA EIS, which is the Landscape Vegetation Analysis Project. And those have, again, been brought in directly from our report. City of Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities has a seat at the table at that EIS. And I think they're, again, trying to prioritize those projects that were pointed out in the plan that was put together by Water Development.
I'm certain, but should we wait to see what the results are for Buffalo and Cheyenne? Proof's in the pudding. We're going to find out if this communities in dealing with the Forest Service or not. And that would, like I say, kind of test Karen's viewpoint. Although I hate to do that to Sheridan, but because it would delay you. If the answer is it helps Cheyenne and Buffalo work with the Forest Service to make an effective safety plan, then you're delayed. But I just don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I see.
Chairman, I also sat on that same task force, the governor's task force on forest health. And I think are $165,000 as an investment to save us literally millions of dollars in the case of the Hayman fire, where they had to go through all kinds of mitigation processes in order to so it's not the value of the timber that we need to be looking at. The policymakers at the highest level of the Forest Service are problem is. I think that the local Forest Service folks understand the value of forest by cutting trees, tied for the most part of rules and regulations that are in there. What this does by us is it opportunity to elevate the cutting of that timber to a higher level, and for the local folks, it gives them a tool, those timber sales. Now, we work at the speed of government, so that they've already moved into Buffalo situation. The study part of that indicates to me that that's the way to getting ground. Years for any of the NEPA studies and all the other things that go along with that before you get to the point where you got somebody out there in the field with a chainsaw. But certainly this is the right direction, and I think when we get support of local Forest Service guys saying that it works for them, I think that's the important part of that whole process is.
So, Mr. Chairman, Brad Brooks, who's the Director of the Board of Public Utilities for the City of Cheyenne. Brad, can you offer some of your experiences now with the completed?
You bet. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, so as was mentioned, our study was just here. I can tell you for us, it was vital in the way that we even handled our fire that we just had over this last year at Keystone around Rob Roy Reservoir. It was vital to them on how they fought that fire and the infrastructure they knew that was in there. And it was a positive thing on some of the resources that they saved because of that study. One other important thing that came out of it, though, our board looked at it serious enough to we've budgeted money a year to help with this mitigation. We have now teamed up with the U.S. Forest Service and State Forestry. They had tree sales in around Lake Owing, and now we're combining our resources with theirs to thin those areas out to help mitigate any possibilities from a fire around our Rob Roy area. So there's going to be cutting occurring this year. So valid, it is happening, and it's happened within a year on our project. So we're going to continue to budget for that every year in working with them to mitigate areas around our reservoirs. So that's worth, I just wanted to share that. You bet.
Comments? Thank you.
So you can stay there, Dan. Dan? Well, okay, maybe it's.
Yeah,
Dan, right?
Dan, the other Dan.
Other Dan, okay, thank you. Under tab I is the Sheridan Water Master Plan. At the listing of previous projects of late, we've done a number of level 3 projects with Sheridan. But in this particular request, the city of Sheridan is asking a master plan for not only the city system, but the Sheridan area water supply, which is a county-city effort in terms of supplying water to the entire area. So with that, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan Roberts, Utilities Director for the City of Sheridan. As Director Labonte pointed out, this application is for a comprehensive master plan effort to encompass the Sheridan area water supply. It consists of the Sheridan Area Joint Powers Board and the City of Sheridan. It's operated by the City of Sheridan under one public water supply number, but it does have 2 different governing bodies, operates as one system. I believe the last master plan or level 1 evaluation that was done that we've been able to rely upon for any other future projects was the 2008 Town of Buffalo Sheridan Area Water Supply Lake DeSmet study. And we've been able to rely upon that for some time to bring forward some projects to deal with growth and some long-term planning for the city of Sheridan. But as you can imagine, over the past 10 years, land use patterns and growth has changed, and we've essentially exhausted everything that's available to us in that current study, and we really feel a need to move forward with a new comprehensive plan to help us look forward into the future. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have of me.
Questions of the sponsor?
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, that concludes all of the level 1 projects in account 1.
For a break before we vote on these?
Is it going to be that big? Okay. Well, we can have a break then. I was hoping to get through them, but.
That's quite the young slave driver, isn't it?
Just got a bigger
I'm not.
We're level one. Before we get too far into that, is there anything that, I think there probably is going to be a few things we want to pull out and do separately. I think that would be less confusing than handling the whole thing as a block.
Yes, I feel that there is. I feel that since you ranked Harry all of the watershed studies as a 7, I do feel prioritize those studies, and also, I guess I don't want to tell you your job or what to do here, but I think we should take a hard look at combining and trying to save some resources with the Lower Laramie and the horse. Can be done. I would we are and have you prioritize them in the event that we have some input from the legislature at a later date, and also take a look at seeing if there are any cost savings with regard to the Lower Laramie watershed study to see if we can have some cost savings there before our
That was a motion, so we need now. Harry, did you?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of combining those, there's function to do that. We, the commission, you, the commission, combine those, and then in the planning bill, it becomes one line item. Horse Creek, Lower Laramie watershed study, prescribed budget. You could also appropriations as proposed and go forward with that way. Procurement so for the combined time and seek to hire one consultant to do both of those studies. Separated in the bill, but then the budgets would be combined, and so that's another option that is that takes it outside of the legislative process. So either way would work if you're interested in doing that. And Jody has some information in terms of budget savings.
Mr. Chairman, and just to add a little bit to this discussion, when we had the 7 water use, have a the shed and potential with the 7 of them came up with only about $10,000 that would be a cost savings of. So I just wanted that to throw that out there for a discussion point for you.
Is there any more discussion on the motion?
I guess I want to, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Understand the motion. The motion is to approve studies, but to ask Kerry to prior the case is not the cat. The okay. Make sure I understood the motion. Thank you. 13.
And Mr. Chairman, just to further clarify, by January, you come back and say, well, the cost savings on what we're trying to achieve, then we could still break them out. I mean, so we're still leaving Correct.
I think also then we prioritize what we event.
Discussion on the motion?
Question.
Okay, all those in favor signify.
We're just voting on the, I'm sorry.
We're on,
We're
just
just
on the
voting on the
watershed
watershed
studies.
study.
Just on the 5 watershed
Okay,
studies.
just want to make sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
That in January, call water. Maybe there'll be some interest if it's $1 million contract, and maybe there'll be a little bit of competition. You know, not necessarily saying exactly what they are, but, you know, I don't know. You guys think about it. We'll talk about it tonight.
Projects.
I would is the level 1 project. Projects minus the watershed studies that we've already looked at.
Okay. Probably moved and seconded. Go ahead, Karen.
So if you take, yeah, so what is the total basin that spend $1,000 something in 1 year? Correct.
So let me clarify. Are you including watershed studies? Okay. Just
Correct.
so the land plan did that have wrapped up or close to wrapping up were the Powder Tongue, northeast, and was the last one. All right. What was the budget on that?
$325,000, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. Yeah, 325,000, 350,000, I think is what we.
Sure. Would you like a motion to take? That's
Yeah, I'm saying I'm against those projects. To spend 5 this year and then have them come another 525. And it just sound like we're doing these over.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Seekin.
I didn't say this earlier. I think that congratulate Jody and Peter on attempt to do kind of to try to get to try to gather data that we have so that goes out the wheel. I think we're the first steps, and you need to correct me if I've misunderstood this, but that you're starting the first step of doing one of the things that I've had heartburn about, that we have all of this data. And then we go out and get this data again and again and again. So you're making the first attempt, the data, so that we're not having over and over investment. Start that process. So I heard you to tell me
Mr. Chairman, your kind words, and you're right, that's our intent.
because of that, and it's the starting point of taking the data that we have, and we're not paying 18 consultants every year to do the same thing. So I think that this is, while it's a lot of money here, I think down the road, that we're going to see the savings down the road.
Chairman, I'm not, I just wanted to make sure you were asking you to amend.
Let me get.
I agree with what Jeanette said, although I believe that the study for the data model implementation is something that can be done in-house. I think Harry has enough to, I would hope, or just, excuse me, let's put the spending to where we project can do that, how you can do that. I mean, that looks just to me like it's a data in based on your analysis and said there was not done. That's something that we could probably do in-house. The other stuff, I kind of compliment you on that you're working with these other agencies to get a resolution to all this data, and I can support those.
Motion to take out the model implementation after we.
Acceptable to the second? Okay. Other discussion on this motion then?
Question.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
No.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion to approve recommendation data model implement.
Mr. Chairman, comment on Commissioner Bess is that it can be with discretionary spending. My thoughts to you is that, and having come from the JAC meeting last week, I believe that there will be a move to cut the agency budget, and I do not believe I can commit that we can do that with spending. Option potentially would have to do it will prolong the outcome for many years, because it seems like try to do it with our own staff. There are too many other issues or pending issues coming before you. So I don't believe that I can commit that we can do that in-house.
The savings in-house, but I Jody and Peter would be working every morning for like ever to try to do this additional thing. There's only 2 of them in that office, and they also are project managers as well. And I'm just not convinced that Harry's got extra staff wandering around with nothing to do. I get emails from Barry at 6 in the morning. He hates it when I say his name in public, which is exactly why I say his name in public. So, I mean, I don't know whether you can do it for less than 100 and whatever it is, but I really am not convinced that do it in-house.
No, and I agree. Mr. Chairman, I think that we've got to look at, I don't want to step on dollars to pick up pennies. This, or whether the bid contend, I think that long-term, past the next couple of months, that this will be money well.
Okay, all those in favor signify.
Aye.
Those.
Aye.
Okay. Got 3 more projects.
Mr. Chairman, under tab J, Platte River Recovery Implementation Program Extension. So before I get into this project, let me just step back. Water development funds have been used to enter into cooperative programs with regards to ESA issues. And the two programs that are currently operating, the Colorado River Endangered Fish Species Program, that takes the form of $100,000 creation that's transferred to the state, and that is contribution to that program. Is the Platte River Recovery Program. Involves 3 bird species and 1 fish species in Nebraska, not in Wyoming, but in Nebraska. And the nexus there is that water development in Wyoming potentially affects those 4 species. So that's why Wyoming program started in 2007. That was provided for Wyoming, which was at the time was forward in an nominal E6. That for it is set up the account we're currently using today was a 13th increment. That program is coming to an end at the end of 2019. The program is governed by a 9-member governance committee. As I've said, Wyoming's are member on that committee. And the increment has the 2 primary 1,000 acres in the Central Platte. That goal has been met. The other goal was 1,250 additional water endangered species and used for that purpose. So that goal has not been met at this point in time. We've got about 90,000 out of that goal that's been provided. And so the governance committee, rather than moving to us, is appropriate that we increment period here. Request is to put in place Wyoming share the funding share. That's been negotiated at $3 million for an 18 years of recovery of the Platte River program. And so this funding request is to now appropriate those funds out of Water One. That's where the funds came from originally in 2006 to support the first increment. And so what we want to do, put them in place so that we, as we go forward, Governor excellent for the on Wyoming, but has funds are in place 18-year period. Additional, going forward in the Fish and Wild mandated that there be an addition acres of habitat acquired in the Central Platte. That's part. And as I mentioned, I believe yesterday, the water goal is shifted downward somewhat, 120,000 acre feet. The adaptive management science shows that in fact there's an additional water needed, and then that goal goes to 130. So the goal is about primary goals at least, or seek to accomplish in the extension. Again, as I said yesterday, what I think $3.1 million expenditure on Wyoming's behalf is that buys ESA compliance for water uses in the North and South Platte basins within Wyoming. It buys that compliance for another 13-year period. And just a quick financial summary. The other funding partners in the extension would be the Department of Interior through the Bureau of Reclamation, $78 million. Nebraska is not contributing cash, but is contributing water through Lake McConaughey. State of Colorado contributing a water contribution and $24.9 million in cash. And then Wyoming share is the $3.1 million in cash plus a credit of $12.5 million for water being provided to the program. So quick summary then, $106 million in cash for 13 years. Most of that, or the large majority of that, being provided by the federal government. And then the credit that's being given to the states is a in-kind credit of $50,000, the credit given to the value of the water being provided. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to address any questions.
Harry, no questions, Harry.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, then the next project, and I would invite Greg Kerr to come up. Funding for the UW Office of Water Programs, which is a cooperative program effort between Water Development and University of Wyoming to staff this office, which the program was set up through statute 41-2-125. It is this office that then manages the water research and brings in additional dollars through really the USGS program. But this is an appropriation that is made once every 2 years. So it is money that will fund this, the water development share of this money or the operations in the next biennium. So starting next July 1st and running for the 2 years after that. And Greg, I'll let you provide any additional information.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Select Water Committee, it's my sheer pleasure to address you once again. I'm sure the feeling is mutual.
You only said that because I wasn't here.
As Harry mentioned, the funding for this program, which is our cooperative program with the USGS, the university is one of 54 water resource research institutes in the country. And we combine that with administrative from the National Institutes for Water Resources with our Water Development Commission funding and sources from the University of Wyoming. We have three main focuses and commitments from this program. One is to address related issues of the state and region. The second is to take that information and apply students in those projects. So we train young individuals, young scientists to move into the water field and hopefully stay in Wyoming. I know I see in our audience today that there's several members that have consulting firms that have been within this program, trained those individuals, and they're hopefully gainfully employed at various firms or government agencies. Also, I know that there are actually one particular member's son, Dan Larson's son, he went through this program, was funded through this program, and did his research in this program. So it's a popular program. It does a lot of good for the state. The third focus is information dissemination. So the information that we get from these research projects that benefit the state of Wyoming, we have information dissemination to get that information out and be used. Now, a lot of it may not be used immediately. It's not like a consulting project where we go out and build a diversion. It's information that may not be used until later on. Some examples are the weather modification program. We have been involved in that from the very beginning with ancillary projects that have proven very valuable in providing information for the weather modification. We have a researcher at the University of Wyoming that's pretty well known, Bart Geertz, is actually internationally known because some of the information that he has come up with on our weather modification projects has proven very valuable in this program. And he continues to work on some of these programs today. We talked about weather modification, and one of the things that we seem to be lacking in it is what is the amount of water that we actually have additional water to be able to be used. And Bart is working on that now using the Wyoming NCAR supercomputer to look at some of that information. So that 9 years of study provided valuable data that will continue on. Another area that has become very valuable in the state is our consumptive use information on projects that have looked at consumptive use over the years. Dr. Larry Pokup at the University of Wyoming created consumptive use bulletins that are continually used today. We talk about the Green River Basin and how consumptive use and new technology is upgrading that information. But he mentioned in a previous meeting that that information for consumptive use is still used, that was developed by the University of Wyoming. Our Attorney General, Pete Michaels, came to me during the Montana lawsuit and expressed that information from projects that we had proved very valuable in his work with, helping with that lawsuit. So another area that we've looked at, conveyance losses have been looked at throughout the years, and those conveyance losses are developed and used for management in the state of Wyoming, for water transfers. And so we have a lot of projects, a thorough list of 54 projects that we've had that maybe that information won't be used today, but down the road it becomes very valuable in some cases. So I'll afford you any questions you might have for me.
Questions for Greg?
Down there.
Oh, Commissioner Lancaster.
Chairman. So you're doing such a good job with these students. And we just happen to have 2 watersheds really close to Laramie this summer. Can you send your interns out to do those 2 watershed studies? And will that qualify?
Mr. Chairman, a possibility is to put in through the water research program, looking at research, if it involves research. What we don't do is compete with consulting firms in the state. What we work on with the students is research and research projects.
Questions for Greg? Okay, looks like no more questions, Greg.
So,
move right into.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, then the next tab, tab L, is the UW Water Research Program, the actual funding that's provided by Water Development for those research projects. And Greg, I'll just let you outline where we're at in the process. The budget is to be determined because we won't have, the final selection of projects will be by the commission at your January meeting. And so we will fill in that budget amount at that point in time. I will tell you that the last several years, that amount has been about $300,000, but so we'll have that number. You will make the decision on how much that number will be at January, but we've got a little bit of work to do before you make a decision on proposals.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, what you have in tab L is a listing of our timeline and also information on each project. So you'll have the amount for each project. We've received 9 proposals this year from faculty at the University of Wyoming. And you will note that they have various amounts of funds that are requested, along with the amount of university matching dollars. We're right now in the process of our reviews. So all reviews have been sent out. We have approximately 40 some reviewers that are looking at these particular proposals now. So it's, as Harry said, it's more or less a placekeeper now, and the to be determined amount is based on which projects you might choose at our January meeting.
Questions for Greg?
Mr. Chairman, can we talk about the individual proposals now or not?
Mr. Chairman, I'm really not prepared to do that since these are just a placekeeper and they have not been reviewed or put before the advisory committee yet for their ranking.
I'll give you my advice after this.
Looking forward to it, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second that, Kurt. I'm there.
Any other questions for Greg?
Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman, that completes the review of level one project, or excuse me, Water Development Account 1 projects before you.
Motion to approve the
Governor's recommendation.
director's recommendation. Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Geis, seconded by Commissioner Wagner, that we approve the director's recommendation on all general and other projects in account 1. Any discussion on the motion?
Question.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Carry.
before you move to Water Development Account 3, which is on the agenda for today, I have 2 questions for you. I think I know the answer to one of those, but this pertains to the drafting of the omnibus bills. So the first question is, what do you want to make the effective date? We had the discussion that on the construction bill this last year, it was July 1st. Historically, it has been upon all acts required to make it an act of law, which is the legislature and the governor act. That makes it typically a March effective date. I have not spoken to the LSO since last year, but the LSO was pushing that our bills should be effective July 1st. And recall the discussion, I think it was at the June meeting, of how that did impact at least a couple of projects. So my question to you, as I draft those omnibus bills for your review in January, what would you like the effective dates to be, or the effective date?
Mr. Chairman,
Fallon.
I would request that the effective date be on the date of the governor's signature. July 1st is just way too late in the construction season.
Agree.
I concur with that too. I was involved in some of those issues this spring, and a lot of them was with were with irrigation districts, and by July 1st, their water's on and they've lost the whole spring to work on their ditches. So I think it's very important that it's upon the governor's signature so that those folks can get to working on their projects.
And I would be happy to do that. So next question, and actually there's really two more questions or for you. Lake DeSmet. Within the construction part, it's a different project in terms of the acquisition of those assets. Would you like that incorporated in the omnibus bill, or would you like a separate bill drafted with regards to the purchase of Lake DeSmet assets?
A question to the legislature.
I guess I'd like to ask Select Water what they think.
Senator Meyer.
I'd like a separate one. I think that's something we're going to ask by the Scotts. You know, there's going to be a lot of questions. 50-year sequel. Why do we want to buy it?
Because it's full of water.
And it stayed that way for 50 years. Okay.
Okay, so I will draft a separate bill for that. Well, you may have to help me on the next issue, but with regards to Lake DeSmet, in the 2017 legislative session, there was approved a feasibility study on Lake DeSmet that the commission tabled. And the proper protocol per statute is you have the ability to suspend any project, but with a suspension, you are required to provide a report to the legislature as to the reasons for that suspension. And so I would like some input back from the commission. My recommendation back, I think, as far as March, was to table because did not believe that there was a need to move forward with that feasibility study. I still believe that's the case. We're moving forward with the acquisition. The feasibility study was really to look at condition of facilities and potential uses of that water, a lot of that has been handled in other work, but certainly that feasibility was studied or funded, excuse me, and it has not moved forward. So I think in drafting the future or the next omnibus bill, if it is the intent of the commission to not move forward, to suspend it, we would put in the planning bill then that suspension and then reversion of those funds back into what would be Water Development Account 1. So your thoughts with regards to suspension of that project, and Daniel, if you have any.
As I recall, the commission has already voted or moved to suspend it and put the record of the reason on the record. So all that's really required is just a direction to report to the legislature the reason for that suspension. And with respect to the
So, Mr. Chairman, so then when is it that we would look at either doing water marketing to sell some of that water or lease it or whatever the heck we're going to do with it and look at the facilities? We want to just put that on hold for a while? Or was that part of this feasibility study that you're now asking us to withdraw? The truth is I don't remember.
Not to speak for Harry, but I think that's just something he's probably going to start looking into, assuming we buy the water. You know, we got to buy it first, but I think that's just something that they're going to do in-house, so.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong,
Mr.
Harry.
Chairman, no, you are correct with regards to water marketing. If the state of Wyoming acquires the assets, then we would begin to make some contacts, certainly with local irrigators if there is a need for additional water. Water development would have that available. With regards to condition of the facilities, we will start to learn more as we operate that facility. And then the third piece of that would be if we want to move forward with a project or potential use of that water that would involve, say, movement of water into the Tongue River drainage to offset future Montana calls. That really then puts us into a different feasibility study to look at that particular project, and that would be a separate request that we would bring to you. So.
Questions, Commissioner Bettis? Oh.
Have we given any thought to maybe coming up with some options for future legislation that would either give us the ability with approval of select water to transfer funds between accounts to maybe help us with rehabilitation and some other things?
Actually, I was going to make a motion, which is kind of, and.
Oh, okay, I was going to.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that this goes to, and I was probably inartful yesterday, but I would, and I'm not going to say it quite right, so you guys help me out. I'd like to move that we, the commission, recommend to Select Water that they look at being able to have rehab of dams and reservoirs not be funded out of the rehab account, but everything to do with dams and reservoirs come out of account 3, whether it's new development or rehab, because it's getting late. But I would say that if the legislature does not take money out of account 3 this legislative session, I might stand up here and sing Hello Dolly. So I mean, so I think that we need, you know, that money needs to be spent, and that and rehab account is our thinnest account. But everything that has to do with dams and reservoirs, I think it would be beneficial to the whole program if all of that money comes out of account 3. We can't, the commission doesn't have that power, but we'd like to make a recommendation to the to Select Water that they consider whatever statutory changes need to be made to make that change to allow us the ability to do new development for dams and reservoirs in account 3 and also do any rehabilitation to dams and reservoirs out of account 3. So I'd like to make a recommendation that the select water consider that change that has to go through them and the legislature. And if I said that, if I need to rephrase that, please tell me.
Mr. Chairman, I think she did good, and I would second the recommendation.
Any discussion on the motion?
Question.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Senator.
Get it from these guys here as good as we can, right? That's what I get it. Yeah, and they're supposed to help us to do it because they're right in the thick of it, right? Okay, all right, okay.
Okay, well, with that, let's move on to account 3. We can go to dinner.
So, Mr. Chairman, the first project for your consideration is under the second tab M. It is the West Fork Reservoir, and I'll let Jason walk you through that project.
Oh, you're fine.
So, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation for West Fork Reservoir is a 10,000 acre foot reservoir proposed at the confluence of Lost Creek and Haggerty Creek. Of course, that's in a Little Snake River drainage. And we are proposing partial funding in the amount of $40 million. We've been looking at potential reservoir sites over in the Little Snake drainage for quite a few years now. Started at a big picture, looking at quite a few alternatives, narrowed that down to West Fork. It was head and heels above the rest of the alternatives we looked at. And we as an office think it's the LEDPA, which is the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative for the 404 permitting process. And then we've continued on and taken a really hard look at aquatic resources, hydrology, water quality, economics. And we feel it's a good investment for the community there as well as the state of Wyoming. The next steps appear to be some kind of land acquisition or land trade or exchange with the Forest Service, which would provide or require federal legislation, as well as continuing discussions about partnerships with Colorado in regards to funding. So I believe that this $40 million appropriation would be a good platform to start those next steps. And with that, we have Bob Davis representing the district, Little Snake River Conservation District, or Conservancy District, Savory Little Snake.
Go ahead.
So, Bob, are you okay with whatever the partial funding? I don't know what your original funding request was.
I'm very happy with it.
That was a bluff.
Platform to go forward, and these are critical times right now. You know, I realize it can't be funded 100% yet, but if we've got this commitment, then we can move forward. Jason's when the funding does become available, then we can go to construction.
Other questions for the sponsor? Bob, did you have anything you wanted to say other than that? Okay, you're just here? Okay. Any other questions of sponsor? Oh, Harry, go ahead.
Chairman, as you're aware, and this is not a new subject, but we have an appropriator above the proposed reservoir site. They divert through the Belvedere ditch. That is Cody and Cindy McKee. They have a number of supplemental water rights. We've provided in your notebook a letter that they provided October 27th, this project, and Jeb Stewart is here representing them, and he is requested to be able to address you, and I would recommend that we let Jeb also talk about the project.
I'm going to take up a lot of room here.
We can move.
Mr. Chairman, with your pleasure, I have some handouts. I'll give my friend Josh a copy here first. You can help. So, Mr.
Chairman, I'm pretty sure I have enough of this. My printer might have shorted me on another. So I apologize if some of you have to share on one of the handouts in advance. So Mr. Chairman, I brought a lot of stuff to prepare for questions after I address you.
Go ahead. Yeah, you should be good. Go ahead and start whenever you're ready. You're good to go.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for the privilege of your time, and I do request the privilege, Mr. Chairman, to address the commission and select water committee directly. I would like to ask some questions today, Mr. Chairman, in the public arena, because written comments and questions made previously have not been responded to. I'm asking these questions to you, Mr. Chairman, and commissioners and select water. These questions are not being asked of WWDO staff. I think it's very important before you allow a vote on this issue in support of the appropriation of $40 million on this project. These are important questions you need to be able to answer. It is understood you have read and understand the level 2 study from 2012 and the just out level 2 phase 2 study that just came out, I believe, 3 days ago. These studies will be referenced. Mr. Chairman and commissioners and select water, you know, if you can't answer these questions, that's okay. That speaks volumes. So the background for question 1, Mr. Chairman. Level 2 phase 2 study identifies 19,046 acres that could be directly served by the proposed West Fork Reservoir. Reduce average irrigation shortages estimated to be in the range of 3,600 acre feet. This represents only a 2% average shortage over all of those acres, Mr. Chairman. Most of these acres are already served by High Savory Reservoir, where we also find the majority of the irrigation shortages. 2,930 acre feet of the total shortages appear on acres already served by High Savory Reservoir. This leaves 756 acre feet of shortages associated with the approximately 1,600 to 2,000 acres of new lands that do not currently benefit from High Savory Reservoir that will benefit from the proposed West Fork Reservoir, of which those acres I just spoke of appear in Colorado. And in your recommendations, the 4-page sheet from WWDO, there's a map that you could look at that shows these new acres that are not able to be served by High Savory Reservoir. From the initial level 2 study, we know the model scenarios that were run to determine shortages uses, and this is in quotes, Mr. Chairman, uses current High Savory Reservoir operations with releases to downstream water users. That's from chapter 2, page 14 of 21. This means modified operations of High Savory Reservoir to meet irrigation shortages were not a consideration in developing purpose and need for this proposed West Fork Reservoir. We also know from the Level 2, Phase 2 study that currently there are no limits placed on the amount of water that can be released to any particular ditch in the West Fork Reservoir service area. And the storage is on first come, first served basis. Of course, High Savory Reservoir is within the West Fork Reservoir service area, and it is the only reservoir currently in operation. In order to develop the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative, you've all heard these words before, to be considered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in its analysis to issue a 404 permit to construct, this analysis should have been done. And why? Of course, if it had been done, most certainly, they would have found High Savory would have been able to address these shortages, thereby recommending a smaller reservoir. Question number one, Mr. Chairman, why was modified operations of High Savory Reservoir not considered in order to meet irrigation shortages and developing purpose and need for the proposed West Fork Reservoir? Moving on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the breakdown of the proposed budget for the West Fork Reservoir found on page 1 of the 2018 recommendations. And I'm referring to this, I got my copy off the website. Why is it not shown the amount that Colorado will pay for this project that reflects 26.6% of the grant portion of the budget? This would recognize 5,058 acres served by the proposed West Fork Reservoir out of the total 19,046 acres that appear in Colorado and would benefit from this project. And just to prime the pump for that, Mr. Chairman, that amount, 26.6% of the grant funding of 66,125,760 turns out to be 17,589,400. Thank you for those answers, Mr. Chairman. Background for question number 3. The Level 2 Phase 2 draft report stated that the benefit cost ratio for the West Fork Reservoir project to be less than 1. And the numbers from that draft report were the maximum ratio of 0.8. The Level 2 Phase 2 final report that came out 2 days ago states that the benefit cost ratio for the West Fork Reservoir to be greater than 1 or 1.2. You will see that number cited on a couple of occasions in the 2018 recommendations. We see the biggest increases in benefits between the draft and final coming from the irrigation benefits column, going from 35 million to 51 million, a significant increase. These changes from draft to final appear to the casual observer an effort to force the numbers to achieve desired results of leveraging a higher grant portion from the state and produces low confidence in how the numbers are calculated. Question 3, see if we can keep this going 100%. Could you explain your understanding, Mr. Chairman, of this process to determine public benefit and the inputs for calculations for benefit cost ratio in order to give observers confidence the appropriation being considered is justified?
So to reference, the second handout provides copies exactly from the draft report, comparing them to the final report, showing the significant changes. It puzzles me which ones are right, which ones are wrong, and what inputs were changed to arrive at different conclusions. Thank you for that response, Mr. Chairman. My final question, maybe we'll do a little better. So on page 2 and 4 of the 2018 recommendations, could you please explain this new sense of urgency for the justification for encumbering this $40 million that is found in your recommendations? Does anyone have an explanation for that? Thank you for your time and the privilege of your time, Mr. Chairman. If anyone has any questions for me, I would be happy to answer. I brought a pile of documents to respond to any sort of questions.
Questions for Mr. Stewart?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Bud Fallon.
So, Mr. Stewart, is it your position that we should not fund this project at all? Short answer.
Yes. Your question was, it is my recommendation to not fund?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer would be yes, Commissioner Phelan. If I may, Mr. Chairman, to respond to that in a little better, what I'm trying to do today, Mr. Chairman, is bring up some questions of process, which is not the first time I've attempted to do this, and clearly my questions and comments previously have not been responded to. So I've taken it to try and flush these things out. I do not believe this is a good expense for the state of Wyoming.
Did you have something?
I got a few concerns, I guess, about the sizing of the reservoir, looking at it seems like if we were to build it, I'm not sure whether we need to build it at this size. And then, I don't know where these tables came from, but we got huge benefits for in-stream flow. That seems kind of sketchy to me as far as going from 4.8 to 26.8 million and benefits in in-stream flow. Adding process a little bit as far as what the benefits might be. This one, the cost per acre foot is it's pretty substantial. You're 17,000, 16 to 17,000. So it's a high cost project. I don't know whether the cost would go down if we if there's only 700 or 800 acres that actually needs irrigation water, whether it's a smaller dam and that's actually all we need. So I think there's a few questions that I'd like to have answered along those lines. I don't know if we need to necessarily scrap this whole thing, but if it was a smaller dam, a lot of the current concerns that I have about overbuilding a project in a watershed and sucking up all the water and causing all of the subsequent lawsuits that might occur over the next 100 years would be mitigated if it wasn't as big a dam as we're contemplating. So really the question about how much water is actually needed, you know, is it, you know, 1,000 acre feet or 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 acre feet, you know, and I'm concerned about, you know, as that stream meanders in and out of Colorado, if we build a dam in Wyoming, you know, what the situation is there as far as Colorado landowners using that. So, you know, there's some of the details I think that I'd feel comfortable. I'd like to see whether or not we need to build it to that level. I know we want to try to build the biggest dam we can and get the most water behind it, but
Other questions? Comments? Okay.
So Jason, can you answer his questions about the dam size and the footprint?
Yes. So 3,600 is an average. We're looking at 1971 to 2014 as far as our modeling period. We've got years where we don't need any water. We've got high water years, and we've got years where we need tens of thousands of acre feet of water to supply the crops out there. So 3,600 is an average of years of zero and years of 20 to 30,000 acre feet of shortage. So reducing the size of the dam is not going to take care of, I mean, you can't ever build a dam big enough, frankly, to cover drought. So it's based on the period of record. There's still shortages. We've got, it's a 10,000 acre foot dam. We've got 6,500 acre feet designated for active irrigation. We've got a minimum pool for public benefit, and then we've got in-stream flow water. I don't like calling it in-stream flow, but that's the easiest way to describe it, to meet what Game and Fish would say is a minimum flow requirements downstream for a viable fishery. So there's 1,500 acre feet in there for that as well. So if you look at that 6,500 acre feet and take it throughout that period of record from 1971 to 2014, there are still shortages. And I believe it's 50% of the time there are shortages when you look at the permitted acres in that watershed that are serviceable. So I don't think there's a need to reduce the actual volume of the reservoir. If anything, we would try to build it bigger.
Mr. Chairman, now my concern is height. If half the time you're going to have a shortage where the dam won't even be filled and won't supply the irrigation needs to the people below the dam, because then they really have, I guess, as much emphasis as they can to try to start abandoning water rights so they can fill the dam every year. And now I'm really concerned.
I'd like to address that. So in a situation like this, we've got either years where we've got good water, where everybody is satisfied, and we've got years where we don't have good water. And at that point in time, we're called off by senior downstream water users. And the dam is a present day water right, so it only fills when it's in priority.
In the situation what you have is that you might not have a total abandonment, but you'll have partial abandonments. And let's say somebody's got 6 or 7 foot of water and they're irrigating 400 acres. But maybe they don't irrigate every acre. Maybe they only irrigate 360 acres. Well, there's a partial abandonment on those 40 acres that aren't irrigated. And so that's 6 foot of water goes down 10%. And so they only got 5.4 acre feet to work with. Well, when you only got 5.4 acre feet, you can't get over the land quite as fast. And maybe 5 years down the road, they've only been able to irrigate, you know, 360 acres. And so what happens is that as it rolls through the process, every 5 years, they chip away at your acreage. Every 5 years, you got another lawsuit and they chip away at your acreage. And pretty soon you're down to where you don't have a critical amount of water to even take it down your ditch. And that's the process of partial abandonment. And that's how it works. Because you have to, if you use it or you lose it. And you have to have wetted acres or you get a partial abandonment. And that's the concern that I have. When you overbuild in a watershed where you've got a bigger demand than what the watershed can satisfy, and you have a 365-day-a-year call. And that's just the facts, and that's the way it works.
Anything I would add to that would be that this reservoir is going to be owned and operated by the Conservancy District. So the landowners that make up that community. So it would be the landowners that would be trying to abandon the lands of their own in that situation. And the state of Wyoming does not plan to own and operate this reservoir. It's going to be owned by the sponsor.
I don't believe that one of the junior ditches upstream is going to have the benefit of that type of protection. Bob, go ahead.
Are you talking above the storage facility or below the storage facility?
Well, I've seen it happen primarily above the storage facility where water rights could potentially fill the storage facility. That's normally where the target is. It doesn't make any difference whether it's junior or senior rights. They'll attack both.
So in this particular instance, if I'm not mistaken, Jason, there's only a supplemental water right above
Correct.
the West Fork of Battle Creek.
8 supplemental rights out of the same ditch.
Supplemental rights above the West Fork of Battle Creek. As far as the irrigation below the dam, this is what we would be considering late season water. After our crops are up in the valley, this is what grows our pastures back. Okay? It may on occasion, as in 10-11, in 10 we had a 100-year event that we had a 100-year event of too much water. In 11 we had a drought. So we had 100-year events back to back in 2 years. But this primarily is on water. We can release it early to make the crop, or we can use it to grow back the pasture in the valley there. You know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not saying that water in the reservoir is not going to be beneficial to the downstream appropriators for the people on the reservoir. No, I'm not saying that at all. It would be beneficial to them. But what I'm saying is that anybody that has a water right above that, whether it's supplemental, first right, a territorial right, or a state right, doesn't make any difference. They're all subject to abandonment if you don't irrigate your ground. And what happens is that if you don't have enough water to put down that ditch to get it to the end and irrigate all your fields, if it gets chipped away, you never get the water to the end. And it just keeps chipping away, and pretty soon you don't have anything.
To address the economics, if I could. So the draft economics, there were some qualitative assessments of benefits, and we tried to quantify those after we received comments presentation. So when we look at economics, we look at first and foremost is the direct economic benefit to irrigation, that additional crop yield. With that, you get a multiplier effect of new income in a region because that landowner now produces more tons of alfalfa or hay. And there's a multiplier, like I mentioned, that's provided by the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the Department of Commerce that we then use to apply that multiplier. We also look at recreation benefits in the form of fishing, camping, and hiking associated with that. Again, there are nationwide statistics out there for what a fishing day can be valued at, or a boating day, or a camping day, things of that nature. In regards to in-stream flow benefits, we had discussions with the Game and Fish Department in regards to the area below the dam. It's currently impacted by the Ferris Haggerty mine with copper. This project has brought new emphasis from the Abandoned Mine Lands Department to go up and try to clean up that mess that's been there for 100 years. In addition to that, the reservoir will either maintain the water quality, or many think will improve the water quality in addition to what the project's been bringing with AML above the reservoir. And then not to mention, in the past, there are months of the year that basically the creek goes dry or nearly dry. And with this, quote, in-stream flow in the reservoir and additional supplemental late season irrigation, we're providing benefits to that stream for fisheries. In addition to that, we also analyzed the private benefits. So that's public benefit. We looked at lands, or the section of stream that lies on Forest Service lands that is accessible by the public. We also looked at private lands based on what we're seeing at High Savory Reservoir. Because the improvements in fisheries down below High Savory Reservoir, there's landowners that are now improving the stream and actually providing basically fishing for clients that come in and pay up to, I think, $600 or $700 a day. So we did not include that private benefit, but we then looked at the indirect benefit of that new regional income and how that gets spent in the community. We also looked at the construction benefits associated with this. It's an $80 million facility. We recognize that it's a roller compacted concrete dam as it currently sits, so that's somewhat specialized, and materials are going to have to come out of Colorado or other areas because it's not locally available. So we only used a 5% benefit on the construction aspect of it. And then on top of that, we still have qualitative assessments that are difficult to quantify, such as the effects on wetlands and the impact that has on recreation and wildlife. Because what we've seen with High Savory Reservoir is we have intermittent wetlands. I'm not sure that's the right term, but wetlands that dry up during the year. Now on below High Savory, those wetlands have become perennial. They're there year round and providing benefits year round. There's also potential benefits to sensitive species on the Little Snake itself. And these are non-game species such as the leather-side chub, suckers, things of that nature, warm water species. Potential benefits to T&E species on the Yampa, and I think we heard some discussion about that with Pat O'Toole yesterday. Game and Fish has thought about the potential, and we've thought about the potential of trying to make that area up above the reservoir basically a pure Colorado River cutthroat trout population rather than having brook trout and rainbow trout as well. So there's potential to prevent listing there. And then potential benefits to Savory Creek downstream. The benefits we looked at for in-stream flows equate to about 8 miles of that public and private section, but then there's potential benefits to an additional 22 miles down to about Savory Creek is what Game and Fish thinks is viable for trout fishery. So those are qualitative and were not included in the economic analysis. And with that additional trying to quantitate what was qualitative before in the draft report, that's how we came up with the 1.2 benefit cost ratio. With that, we look at direct benefit and indirect benefit, or I should say public benefit, because our criteria says we can't grant dollars more than what the public benefit equates to. And if you look at all those public benefits, they add up to 67.7 million, I think, for the smaller reservoir. And it was, I forget the numbers, but 73.7 million for the 10,000 acre foot reservoir. So that's about a 92% grant that we would project.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as far as the Colorado side, we're actively pursuing conversations over there. There was just a meeting with the Colorado Yampa Roundtable where they're in the process at looking at all their high basin storage also over there. They're really excited about it. There's like 6 or 8 new reservoirs that they're going to look at sites and proposals on just across the border. So does fit right in with all of that, and they will probably be involved in
Mr. Chairman, the other thing that I would offer in that regards is that about a year and a half, maybe not quite that long ago, I spoke with my counterpart for the state of Colorado and put this project on their radar. I said, Wyoming is moving forward with this project. There are benefits to Colorado, and I want you to consider this project going forward. And at that time, I spoke to James Eklund, who is my counterpart, as well as John Stolp, who is the water policy advisor to Governor Hickenlooper in Colorado. So those conversations are continuing. With this appropriation for construction funding, it shows that Wyoming is certainly serious in moving this project forward. And those conversations have then continued with the local sponsor between Colorado and the sponsor there. So just an additional comment.
Yeah, and I'd also like to address, or actually have Dylan Wade with Wenck Associates, who's been the consultant on this project and provided the hydrologic modeling to discuss the question number 1 about modified operations of High Savory Reservoir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first question, as I heard it from Mr. Stewart here, was that High Savory cannot address, or High Savory can address the shortages in its service area or in the service area. And the modeling we did showed that that is not correct. High Savory Reservoir cannot meet our shortages in the water basin. And in fact, I can model High Savory as
able to be fully utilized by any shortage in that lower basin. Whereas in practice, on the ground, I believe there's contracts to specific pieces of ground. I instead allowed High Savory water, the full irrigation pool, to go to any piece of ground in that lower Little Snake Basin, any piece of ground that is downstream of High Savory.
And lastly, I guess I would like to address the question about the grant loan breakdown. That's a good point, Mr. Stewart. This was simply to show what the ability to pay is on this project and what the grant loan would have to look like in order for it to be affordable for the sponsor.
So Mr. Chairman, suggestion for the commission. Well, these kinds of, Jeb Stewart has approached you before with similar questions. This is the first time we've been able to see these questions. And I think there's reasonable responses. You've heard some of those at this point in time. My recommendation would be that you keep the funding in place for this project, but then prior to your January meeting, we give an opportunity to our consultant, Wenck, to respond to these questions in more detail, and that we will then discuss these at the work session in January, and then you will make a final decision in January as to whether or not this project should remain in the bill. That would be my suggestion for you today.
Senator Meyer. Questions I'd like to have answered, Harry, is try to get a firm yield. Would go over the dry periods and the wet periods on an annualized basis. And the way I think that you could operate that reservoir that would mitigate some of the problems would be if you had a firm yield about what you could release every year with on an annualized basis. Just figure that out, whether it's going to be. We know it's not going to be that 5,000 or 6,000 acre feet, because testimony's been here today is that it gets dry. But if you're only going to allow 2,000 acre feet of water to go down, you know, would that be a firm yield every year? So the lake never did go dry or get below there. So you could, you know, so build it big enough, you know, from the standpoint that you're going to have the firm yield. And then look at also, Mr. Chairman, the whether or not any of the in-stream flow could be utilized downstream during the irrigation season. So look at the time of releases for in-stream flow. Because if you got 1,500 acre feet going down for in-stream flow, that can, our law says anybody with a head gate can pick that up. So that's something you might look at. You can't carry it down past head gates. That's not how our water structure works. So, you know, you could add that 1,500 or a portion of that into the amount of water that could be irrigated. So you could mitigate the demand on operators and provide a firm amount of water for everybody on a year-long basis. But you'd have to figure out how to manage it so you can leave so much water in the lake as a minimum pool be carried over to the next year. And I think that would help the process somewhat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I do believe we have a firm yield number associated with that 6,500 acre feet of irrigation water. Do you know that off the top of your head?
Mr. Chairman, just a little bit over 5,000 acre feet.
And in regards to the in-stream flow, I'm calling it in-stream flow. It's not actually in-stream flow, protected in-stream flow. So if it was released during irrigation season, they could pick it up. You're correct with for irrigation. Typically, it's going to be outside of irrigation season when that flow is so low that you have to supplement it for fish. So then it could be used as stock water as well.
Commissioner Bud Fallon,
I'm ready to make a motion.
go ahead. Please do.
Mr. Chairman, I move the director's recommendation with regard to this project. I think it's fine if we want to bring it back in January and have it answer to these questions. The only thing that I would caution is that I view all of these questions and concerns as trying to hold up a dam project because people don't like deficiencies in Wyoming water law statutes. And I think if you're concerned about Wyoming water law statutes and whether you could, how long and how, quote, guaranteed you are to free river systems, which you're not, or if we don't like the abandonment statutes, I think we need to talk to the legislature and get them to fix it and not hold this reservoir hostage. But I'm fine with coming back and looking at these questions in January if we want to, but I would move that we appropriate the $40 million now.
I second.
Moved by Commissioner Bud Fallon. I'm not really sure who seconded, but
Everybody seconded.
Everybody.
Rest of the commission seconded.
We'll say Jerry did next to me. So with that, any discussion on the motion?
Question.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, let's do the little two projects real quick. Do you need another?
I do not favor the no call.
So, can I take it? Sure.
Box for my house this
Mary, go ahead.
Oh my.
Mr. Chairman, the
blocks.
only project we have under level 2 in the dam and reservoir account is what we're calling Cheyenne Municipal Storage. This is the sponsor is the City of Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities. They're a regional supplier that supply about 75,000 people currently in the City of Cheyenne, South Cheyenne, Water and Sewer District, as well as FE Warren Air Force Base. So they are a regional supplier currently. It's a very complex system. We've got representatives from the sponsor here today. I'm not going to try to explain the system, but it has transbasin diversion, water rights exchanges, reservoirs, groundwater, numerous things. We actually toured part of that water system in 2016, I think, for the August tour when we were looking at all the collection galleries and Rob Roy Reservoir and all that. That's part of the Cheyenne system. So in 2013, the Board of Public Utilities performed a master plan and looked out projection of population growth out to the next 50 years and anticipated growth of approximately 36 to 47,000 people. And they're trying to be proactive on how to address that in the future. So with that, I guess if you have any questions for the sponsor.
Questions of the sponsor? You guys have anything you want to add to that, or?
I'll make it quick. Yes, my name is Brad Brooks. I'm the director with the City of Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities. And I have Bruce Hattig with me as well. He's our engineering water resource manager. We just want to tell you thank you for considering this project. And also, anytime I get an opportunity to be before you all, I want to again thank you for your long history of projects that you supported us on, because it's been vital to what we've been able to do in Cheyenne. So I just want to say thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Evans.
I apologize for starting a ruckus down there. I thought we were adjourned after the last presentation. So I apologize.
We're going to adopt your opinion.
Okay. That's all I had to say.
Okay, any questions of the sponsor?
Question.
Senator Moniz.
I was curious if this project has any relation of the Casper Aquifer on the Belvoir Ranch.
It does not have anything to do with that project. No.
Thing about then, Mr. Chairman, is how does that relate to your future plans for water for the city of Cheyenne on that aquifer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and commissioners. So this project that you're considering today is what we look at as another project that came out of our master plan. We have three major things that the city is looking at in the future, and they would be development of the Belvoir Ranch, which you actually participated in a study that we have those numbers for, which the aquifer is part of that on the west side of the ranch, the Casper Aquifer. The other item would be the board is also looking at direct potable reuse from our water reclamation facilities as how we're going to gain some additional water for the city. And then this study was also another recommendation of our master plan in doing enlargements of these three reservoirs. So our goal is we want to get all these done, and then our board will be looking kind of proactively at what's the next step we take, looking at what all these items cost. What do we feel would be the best use of our money, the most financial next step of how we're going to develop and get some additional water storage and resources for the city of Cheyenne. Hopefully that answers your question.
Any other questions? That's it for level 2 projects. Got a motion? Oh, well, we've got a motion. You want to second it? Second. Okay. Moved by Commissioner Geis, seconded by Commissioner Wagner, that we accept all level 2 projects out of account 3. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thanks, guys. Do we need to take a break, or shall we hammer out these last 3?
Mr. Chairman, they'll be pretty quick, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so
Jason.
Mr. Chairman, we've got, these 3 are very much associated, so I'll kind of talk about them in tandem and then individually real quickly. We had several appropriations in 2015 on planning appropriations. They're only good for 3 years, and then they revert if they're uncommitted funds associated with that appropriation. So with the first appropriation for the Nowood River storage, this is Alkali Creek Reservoir. This was for permitting and design, and it's set to revert in July of next year. Recommend that appropriation be extended by 3 additional years, and that's because we are currently in the NEPA process. We've got a final design consultant contracted now, and our NEPA liaison consultant as well. So if any unforeseen things come up, we would like to have the flexibility to put that money into contract if need be and prevent the process from slowing down. And in light of the current revenue situation, rather than letting it revert, we can keep it tied to a project. That's always good, I think. So that's Nowood. Clear Creek Storage. same thing. It's just an appropriation set to revert. This project is a level 2 phase 2 study currently. And it was held up, if you recall, several years ago, we were talking about the Bull Creek Ranch associated with the Upper Bull Creek Reservoir site. And we had a lot of discussion with state lands and numerous other NGOs in regards to a land exchange with state lands and the Bull Creek Ranch. That exchange took place, but it did delay our geotechnical drilling and our ability to get in on that. So actually to bring a design and permitting recommendation to you this year, but we're a little behind on that project. So I'd like to keep that uncommitted funds in place similar to the other project so we can get as far down the road and fill as many data gaps as we can going into that NEPA process. And then the last one is Levitt Reservoir. Exactly the same as Alkali Creek Reservoir. We've got the NEPA, third-party NEPA contractor, the final design consultant. We have some additional money in there that's not committed under contract yet, but I think it'd be wise to keep that money viable and extend that appropriation by 3 years as well. So that's those three.
By Commissioner Geis, seconded by Commissioner Wagner, that we accept all level 2 amendments to account 3. Any discussion on the motion?
I have a question for Jason.
Go ahead.
Do you internally have any tentative date for when construction would start on both Alkali Creek?
If I had to guess right now, I would say 2020.
Construction season?
Yeah. It moved, well, I won't get into the weeds. 2020. It was 2021, but a secretarial order came out to hopefully streamline NEPA, which condensed the schedule for NEPA. And I'm hoping that actually occurs. So that's why I'm saying 2020 now instead of 2021.
Any further discussion? Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, how much of the money budgets have you spent already?
Well, we have under contract quite a bit of it. So I'll tell you what the balance is, and then you can do the math. For the Clear Creek storage project, we had $700,000, I believe. As part of that appropriation, we have about $153,000 that's not committed or under contract at this point. The Nowood River Storage Alkali Creek Reservoir, we originally had $4 million for the permitting and design, and we've got about $560,000 that's uncommitted at this point. And then for the Levitt Reservoir, the Shell Valley Storage, we had $4.5 million, and there's about $280,000 uncommitted. And as you recall, you just committed about $100,000 of that to a contract. Is that today? Today. So it's probably down to 180 now.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Question on the motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, and that is it for everything. Harry, do you have anything to add?
Chairman, that's it for today. 8:30 tomorrow, we will take up Water Development Account 2.
If we adjourn?
I don't think we need a motion to adjourn. I think we're just kind of taking a break, correct? Yeah.
Okay. That's it, just taking a break. We can't adjourn?
Until tomorrow.